week, and then yesterday a fucking helicopter with a bucket was out dousing hotspots. So we've had a little few smoke flare ups, but there's, you know, the way that the fire burnt, I don't know, I don't like to say this because it riles people up, but the way that the fire burnt is not necessarily how people perceive the fire to burn, especially up in my area. Yeah. So a lot of it didn't get into the canopy, or most of it didn't get up into the canopy. So it was a trail burn. So it burnt all the, you know, biomass that had been built up over the last few decades of management. Yeah. But when you, and I wish I could take you outside so you could actually see it, but I have to get my cameras up and set up. But the way that the fire's moved is very, very interesting. It's very, very interesting. You all know that we've been studying these ancient practices for some time, and we're dealing in LORE, and I apologize for spelling it to everybody. But
there we go. I'm just muting some people in the background.
Oh,
there we go.
That's all right. I thought they might have had something to say.
Yeah.
I've gotten good at listening. The way that the fire has moved, it's so you've heard in the news, you know, the aspects of the rainforest is burning, and it is, but it's underneath. So it's a scrub. It's the build up of biomass, and where the fire has actually gotten to the canopy in the rainforest is actually in the eucalyptus. And the
eucalyptus is so volatile.
But it's not supposed to grow in rainforest. It's not a rainforest tree. So under LORE, those trees are breaking law. Yeah. So the way that the fire has actually moved, it started, you know, and I'm not, I'm not bigging this fire up because it should never have happened, and it shouldn't be happening the way it is. But the way it seems to have moved, especially through my area, is actually through the trees that are not supposed to be in the areas that they're in, which is even more interesting than the fires themselves starting in my world.
Well,
so to answer your question, the whole in my area, they're going all right.
Yeah, you answered it to it fairly well, and you added that last little bit in there. Really, I find interesting. In the same way, I think you do.
Well, that's the whole thing. The originating thing is that they burn off they do controlled burns to burn out all that scrub, right? To keep the land clear of all that biomass that builds up and builds up and builds up.
Yeah, exactly.
So then as fire comes through.
Yeah, take it a whole step further, and that scrub and all that unmitigated biomass would never have been there. So the fires wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have been able to happen. See, this is the big thing.
Yeah.
You know, instead of calling it cultural burns or cold burning or back burning or fire stick farming or any of those things, I mean, we could update its actual terminology, and it is biomass mitigation. You know, this is the more build up of biomass, the more potential for fire.
Can I want to ask a question, if any one of you guys know. I was having a conversation with another Aussie friend of mine. This was about 3 months ago when the fires were first starting. And they were saying, okay, everyone in California is blaming this, that, and the other, but California has been growing a shit ton of eucalyptus. And they said that's what's burning is the eucalyptus, which is so volatile.
It's also the pine, D.
These fucking pine trees.
Well, it's really funny. I had this little sort of fucking conversation in my head as I do yesterday, and because we're like, one of the things that we're focusing on is trying to establish something similar to Paul Stamets up in the Americas with his bioshield, which is starting to look at the fungi and the properties of fungi that are native to this area. The fires have sort of, in certain ways, have been a blessing because they've cleared everything out. So I'm able to go for walks and take cultures from out in the forest, right?
Yeah.
But I was sitting there, and in growing mushrooms, you need like quite a sterile space. And mushrooms seem to grow quite happily out in the forest. Now, I had this sort of thought with the eucalyptuses and the pines, what do we use those oils for?
Essential oils. They're extremely volatile.
But they're also antibacterial,
Yeah, they are.
antifungal. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so in the pine forest, when you walk through, you're smelling technically, a disinfected air.
Yep.
But I sort of digress. So, but in that, you also smell those volatile oils, and especially in places like the Blue Mountains and stuff like that, which is eucalyptus country. The reason they're called the Blue Mountains is because of the blue gums and that sort of stuff there, and the haze that happens in the sky with that eucalyptus. So yeah, highly volatile oils. In California, and that there's a lot of pine, and the pine has been having a lot of die off over the last decade,
the pine beetle stuff
with the pine beetles, and so I don't see anyone having mitigated that. How many dead trees are still standing? All that kind of stuff, you know.
Same thing in Texas. Same thing in Texas.
What was that?
Same thing in Texas with the pine trees and the beetle bugs. Same shit. Shit.
Yeah. Well, across the whole North Americas, the pine beetle has been, you know, infecting those
everything.
trees. But when you've got dead stands, and you've got a lot of dead stands, those things go up like wildfire.
Yeah.
And they fall over. So they fall over if they're not already down. See, if you've got a burning log, a log can burn for days and days, weeks and weeks, even months and months, just smoldering. But if it's got no biomass for it to catch on fire, it can't travel.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of mismanagement that has been occurring, you know, over the last few centuries, really.
And no one talks, like, this is one of the things that when you try and engage people in conversations above and beyond the set narratives that have apparently just completely enraptured the awake community, i.e. it's weapons, i.e. it's the high-speed train systems that they're trying to get us, steal all the land, etc., etc. When you try to get through that and look at the other things like the pine, like the fact that the forestry has not been managed for at least 100 years. At least 100 years since correctly managed in a way that would be natural to those areas. You have all this volatile pine, eucalyptus, etc. in these areas where there's these massive fires going.
Well, and you know my theory on the pine, D.
Yeah,
I actually think Pinus radiatus is you know, people look at dew and harp and all these sorts of things, but you got to look at the way the colonials laid out their colonialism. You know, their infection. You know, pine was one of the first trees that went in. They you know, they used to say they planted pines, and you'll go to certain areas where the boats landed, and there'll be these stands of these massive pine trees, and the reason that they planted them, they say, for the masts, right? They were good for masts.
Exactly.
So they planted them in the bays that they stopped in, so that if they had a broken mast, they could pull in, fix it up. But I'm talking about these pine forests.
Yeah.
You know, we've gone from building from hardwoods, which, okay, they grow slowly. But we've moved into using pine, like all around the world, actually.
Yep.
Highly flammable. It's not termite resistant. Has to be treated. All these sorts of things. But when you go through
ages
pine forests
poorly,
and you look at what the pine forests do. Now they drop their needles. The needles have the volatile oils, which then inhibit other growths.
Yeah.
So you have a pine needle, highly volatile floor, but it kills everything else, which creates acidification in the soil, which then what? Depletes the soil, kills the bacteria,
soil
and essentially creates a desert. So it's a monocultured desert with burnt soil from the volatile oils. And if pine wasn't growing there, then it's already breaking those procedures. And if you look at a lot of the places, like especially here, all up and down the east coast of Australia, all the pine forests are just inland, which would, in my eyes, is where the wetlands used to be. You know, the livers of the planet. So they've gone and done all this stuff and gone and moved these trees that kill off literally everything. And you can see it everywhere. Everywhere that colonialist regime went, it's identical. And people go, oh, well, they only knew what they knew, and they da-da-da-da. But the fact of the matter is as well, when you look at the way that colonialism went, they actually did go and find out a lot of shit before they started slaughtering people.
Yeah.
You know, so in a lot of areas, especially like in the North Americas, here in Australia, there was a lot of integrated living in which people learn a lot of stuff. The farmers learn off, you know, and so forth and so forth. But the encroachments then got so great, I guess, that's where, you know, murdering and pillaging and all the rest of it takes over. But you can actually see implemented things like the pine, the way that they planted it, where they planted it, all those sorts of bits and pieces. And yeah, when things are left unmitigated, when things are left unmanaged, what do you expect?
Yep.
So even if it was HARP, even if it was Dew, even if it was fucking
a high-speed
weather
rail,
modification,
road, whatever.
Yep. Any of those things, the simple fact of the matter is if it was managed correctly, HARP wouldn't have had effect.
No.
Dew wouldn't have had effect. And then they wouldn't have been able to get the rail, you know. It gets really interesting because, you know, everything has a to and fro.
Yep.
So like here, we clean up pine needles all the time. Like it's a major deal. But like, it's funny, like I went up north, and I'll be damned if they don't use pine needles in their flower beds up there. And I was like, why do y'all use, why? You know, because we use different stuff down here. And I'm like, is that where all the pine needles go? Like somebody's bagging that shit up, sending it to y'all? You know, like, and people buy it.
Why? It's some of the worst shit you can do to your garden.
That's what it's everywhere in the north.
If you've got a highly basic soil,
okay,
it can alter and add. Is it me that's frozen, or is it?
I couldn't believe it.
Your voice is coming through. You just keep your video freezes every so often, Ben. That's all.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like they cut them up. So like you have a pine needle this long, they cut it into like that long. But literally, that's all it is. And they buy that.
And just remember too, and I can't remember. There's three trees that you've got: the conifers, the pines, and there's something else. Can't remember what it is up north. But the distinction is in their needles. So pines are shorter, like mid-range clusters of, I think it's 5, and then there's another one that's got longer needles and it's a cluster of 3. And then you've got the small, like conifers, which have got the small pointy needles.
Yep.
But they're not all the same types of trees. So that dawn, they may be using one of the other things,
like
but
fir
regardless,
trees
still
or Douglas firs or something like that.
Pine.
Like I have this thing about pine needles because I clean up, you know, I get rid of all the pine needles. You know, it doesn't look good. I have to get somebody on my roof to get that shit off every year. You know, so I'm busting my ass to get rid of them, and people are buying that shit. I just like,
well, there's a business.
Whatever.
Yeah, but it's a business, exactly. Someone was real smart going, gee, we got all this pine needles. All we got to do is convince someone it's good for their garden, or it's shishi and it's the truth, you know, and you'll sell it to them, and then they'll, you know.
I was curious about Ben's tangent. I don't know if my brain's working correctly today, but about the tangent about the poisonous pine needles creating a desert atmosphere. Would pine needles be in the Sahara? What made the Sahara barren?
There is the potential. I have thought about that. However, I also have another theory on that, Blair.
Please tell me.
Ben always has a theory. Always.
Well, I've got books on what would you call it? I guess a science called biological transmutation, which shows how you can biotransmute different elements on the periodic table by putting them under different stresses and circumstances. So in the book that I've got, it's written in I think it's in the 50s. And they did a big bunch of studies on soil and adding certain things, but leaving certain things out, and feeding animals certain things that had minerals and certain things in them, but didn't feed them other things. So in this case, it was like the animals, it was chickens. They fed them oats, which is high in potassium. They made sure that they gave them absolutely no calcium, and somehow the chickens were still laying eggs. So they were doing this maths, and they worked out that the chickens were transmuting potassium into calcium. In the same context, carbon and oxygen put under certain, heats times pressures can become silica. So soil is made up of carbon and oxygen and other bits and pieces. And I have a theory that there was a massive electrical storm that potentially hit the ground and actually turned all the soil throughout Egypt, which used to be, the hot spot. That was where we apparently, the cradle of civilization started everything and all the rest of it. So they had healthy soil and all that kind of stuff. And people go, oh, that was due to the floods and the floods washing in, sedimentation, and then they used to plant. But that would then mean that they had to have astrology so that they could plan that sort of stuff. But yeah, I believe that there was a massive electrical discharge, whether it was someone fucking around with something in the pyramids that put it out, or
yeah, you and I have had this conversation.
Ra and Nathangali and all these other gods came in, and it's actually a proving on the electrical universe, much the same as electrical discharge can create almost instantaneous petrification.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what I reckon happened in like the Sahara and Egypt.
And you see the scars. Like if you go look on Google Earth and you go and you look around the edges, obviously you can't look at the Sahara itself because it's sand. But when you look around the edges, the edges of the Sahara where the desert is going up into, the scarring on the ground that we would call, it's exactly mimics electrical lightning scarring. Exactly mimics, except on like, a million times the size, because you're talking, entire thousands and hundreds of miles of land. But that's what it looks like.
And the monoliths, what the fuck are they called? Monoliths, word, I can't think of the actual word. Is that the right word? That word, conductors for electricity? Yeah. Just throwing that out there.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, they're lightning, the lightning conductors, basically. Any high point has a potential to be a lightning conductor, including the pyramids and all the rest of it. So,
well, it's really funny because I was just thinking about when we were down in Morocco, we went down to the south and we went to the Sahara for that week. As you enter into the Sahara area and you say, okay, this is the Sahara, the locals say this is part of the Sahara, but it's not sand. And the first, 20 kilometers, the ground was, I've never seen anything like it. I've never, in any place that I've visited in the world, have I ever seen anything like it. And it was like black rocks, pebbles, but beaten flat. And it's like, as far as the eye can see, it's just this black. And they said like they said like you can find a ton of asteroids there. Like you can find like little pieces of asteroid mixed in amongst this stuff. And I'm like, it looks like a massive explosion went through that. That's what it looks like. Like there was a massive explosion that just leveled the entire ground. And all that's left is this baked, hard, blackened, it's not sand. It's
interesting.
rock.
Well, there's that.
Got to remember stuff like I was going to say, sorry, Blair. I was just going to say that. Just remember where Moldavite and Libyan tektite come from, which is from meteor.
Yep.
Well, isn't that a place in the Midwest or whatever where all the wood got petrified and there's like a giant fucking crater? You know what I'm talking about? Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
There's one in Flagstaff, right, Maurice? And it's supposedly the biggest crater in North America.
Yeah.
Maury's not at his desk, but it's huge. Huge. And Flagstaff is really high up in elevation. You're talking like 6,500 feet. Yeah. You know, and it's interesting about the pines because, you know, Maury and I spent so much time walking, you know, when you go from Sedona and you start going up in elevation, going towards Flagstaff, everything converts to pines. All the gorges, everything is just, but if you walk through the pine forest, you're right, there's nothing else. The ground is just brown and nothing really there but the pine needles.
Yeah, and you'll find that pine forests are actually quite fungal as well.
Self-reflection?
Yeah. Now, hey, Maury, I was talking about the crater in Flagstaff. It's the biggest one in North America, right?
I think so, but I don't know. There's a couple of craters. There's Meteor Crater that's nearby, and there's others. There may be others I don't know about, John.
There's one in Flagstaff. That's the biggest one
Okay.
in North America.
Okay, I don't know that for sure, but I don't doubt you.
Yeah, I thought, yeah. I guess we'll just have to go up there and see it.
Yeah, or look it up and see if it's there.
No, I want to go see that bastard. I
Okay.
need to go see that. Yeah. Yeah, Lori says it's huge. Has anybody seen that before in person at Flagstaff?
I
Never
have.
been there.
Beautiful.
You have, Linda?
Yeah, I've been to that and the Painted Desert. I'm surprised you guys haven't gone.
Well, we've been to the desert thing, you know, because remember I told you, Maury threw a fit about having to wait in line, and the Indian spirits tore his soles off his shoes and made him do the whole thing with like moccasins on.
Oh, wow.
I told you, he started throwing a fit, and within 5 minutes, the sole on his right shoe fell off. And within another 5 minutes, the other one fell off. And I'm not shitting y'all. It was like he was in moccasins.
Donna,
Maury, I've done it myself. I totally get you. Totally.
It was not fun, but it was still, it was beautiful.
Yeah, so we've seen.
It was a little bit rough.
hey, Don, the sun is hitting your camera, and there is a
You're white out.
Yeah, it's
Don-
like a
Don-
snow blizzard in there.
Dom looks like she's like a ghost, and like
Yes.
she's almost transparent. When it was
Better.
like better.
I'm sorry, y'all.
Yeah, we were up, Linda, we were up by Page, which
Yeah.
is up by the Utah border.
We went to Antelope Canyon
Right,
and then Horseshoe Bend. Have
right,
you
which
been
is
to
also beautiful.
Yeah.
It's people all over there. Utah
Yeah.
is fantastic. It's so magical.
Oh, I know. No doubt. Well, we're going to have another big trip to Sedona this year, so.
Hopefully we will. Yep.
Oh, come on. I can't type tonight. Let's try that again.
I still have Sedona on my mind. I've been thinking about Sedona recently. Yeah, off and on. And
Yeah. It's just a great place to just go fucking sit and hike and
Yep.
get out of yourself.
I miss it.
I know.
That shamanic cave or whatever that I've seen you guys go to like twice now, 3 times, whatever, looks really fucking awesome.
My shaman's cave. We've been
Yeah.
there twice now. Because the first year we went, remember that group showed up and Brad Pitt was in the group? And we were
Wow.
like, what the fuck? I mean, it's like 23 of us in this cave. I mean, what are the odds, y'all? What are the odds?
Too big.
I mean, yeah. And that was after Angelina had taken the kids. You know, he'd taken a good ass whooping. So he was not doing well.
And he produced the OA, which is very interesting also.
Oh, did he? I didn't know he did the OA.
Yes.
Brad Pitt produced the OA.
Yes, he was a producer or an investor. One of those.
You said she?
He.
Oh,
He.
It could be a C. I don't fucking know, man. What the fuck is that?
That's damn interesting. Well, obviously he was completely into that ceremony, y'all. He was completely into it.
Do they like do drugs there? Like
No, we did
okay.
a sacred pipe. You know, they did sacred pipe, and everybody seemed to bring something and put it in a pile. What am I missing here, Maury?
That group, it was basically remembrances of I was close enough to see the pictures that they were putting in mostly. It was like lost relatives and kids and family and shit like that. I don't know the exact background of all of it, but there was a lot of emotion involved in it. With
Yeah,
people
music, drums, sacred.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was really good.
Yeah, it was amazing, y'all.
Huh.
And you're way up in that cave overlooking this huge canyon. Like, you just worked your ass off to get up there. And again, y'all know Anna's story. Once we got her in there, she broke down. But, you know, it was an accomplishment, you know. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty serene up there. They call it Robber's Roost locally, but it's also known as Shaman's Cave. So, you know, those are two different spins on the same place.
Robber's Roost. Yeah. Too crazy. So how are you guys doing this week anyways? Like, how's everyone? Is everyone lost in La La Land like I am? Because, fuck. I don't know what day of the week it is. And I've been laughing because the memes keep going around, and there's about 4 or 5 different memes that are all the same thing. Like, basically of like, you know, Christmas, but it's not New Year's, but I don't know what day of the week it is. I don't know where I am. I don't know. And it's so funny that, I mean, Christmas and New Year's always has that little, that kind of feeling like that anyway. But this year, it's like everyone's posting those memes. Like, I don't know what day of the week it is. Is it the weekend? Is it a weekday? Am I supposed to get up?
Someone did an article saying that between Christmas and New Year's, or New Year's Day, it becomes twilight zone. You don't know what day it is, where you're at. It's just like you're floating around with you don't even know what space you are. And then they said, are they doing a reset?
Here's the thing. I talk about this every year. And every year I go through the same research. Go research the Roman god of Janus. And his time is from the winter solstice until approximately between the 5th and the 8th of January, depending on moon cycles, etc., etc. And that time is considered a time outside of time. And when, like, the more I research Janus, and like, he's about portals and time, and et cetera, and that whole time never even had days of the week. It was never assigned dates. That time was a time period that was outside of all time reckoning, even by Roman standards.
That's the term she used. And she is a non-woo-woo person who wrote this, and non-woo-woo people are noticing it. You know, that, what the hell?
Well, you don't have to be woo-woo. The sun stops for 3 days.
Yeah.
It rises in the same spot for 3 days.
I mean,
It did not happen this year. Supposedly, people that measure that, there's people that measure that, and they said that the moon actually moved the second day. Like, they didn't understand.
The sun, not the moon, the sun.
That's what I mean. Like, they were measuring it, and it was not the same.
Well, and so just remember too, I'd like to read that study, but the other side of this is what Dee said, is like, it's, remember, we're given dates. Yeah, we've got this Gregorian calendar that's full of shit.
Sucks balls.
You know? Well, it's a falsity, much the same as a clock. It's just something that breaks something down. So those between solstice and, you know, it's like Easter. Easter's not on an exact day. It's on the whatever Sunday after the blah, 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 whatever the fuck it is.
A certain moon. And
so there's periods that these things occur in. So just because it didn't happen on the 23rd, 24th, 25th, or the 25th, 26th, 27th, it may still occur.
Yeah.
Because it's
Because
in a
it's a
cycle.
moon thing. It's a moon cycle. It's not a sun
The
cycle.
ancients didn't have specific days. They spoke in terms of time periods.
Well, especially like when you talk about the Romans, and it's interesting because the Romans are, say what you want, they're prolific recorders. Like they recorded everything, from like, you know, how much wheat they grew that year to how many slaves they traded. Like the Romans, the records they kept were pretty incredible. And I had someone post in one of the groups that I'm part of that I very rarely go into, and it just came by on my wall, made a post yesterday trying to turn it into like this kind of like a conspiracy theory. Oh my God, because, you know, October, November, December, well, October should be the 8th month and December should be the 10th month. So see, January 1st isn't the new year. And I was like, okay, but like do a little historical reading, you'll understand that the new year by the Romans started March, is when the new year started, and the year ended on the winter solstice. And for 59 days of midwinter, i.e. from winter solstice until March, they had no reckoning of time. They did not, it wasn't assigned months, it wasn't assigned days, it wasn't assigned weeks, it was not assigned anything. It was winter. And winter was just this time period, about 59 to 60 days, depending on the year, that was outside of they had no calendar reckoning for it. So yes, the new year was in March, and they began counting from March, their months, but that time period between the solstice and March, it was outside of time for them. Like it was just it was winter. It was winter. Nothing happened.
Just remember, they totally made months up due to fucking certain Caesars wanting their, you know, names
exactly,
stamped
July,
and shit
August,
like that. And,
yeah.
And then you've also, on the same sort of note, Dawn, it's like I think it's June, July, and October, November / November even into a bit of December, where the Earth goes through the toroid meteor strips. All right. So, but it's not on the 16th, 17th, 18th of October and the 4th, 5th, and 6th of July. It's in those time periods.
Yeah, a bracket
that those things occur.
It makes
you and keep going.
No, I was gonna say it makes you wonder because there's a lot written about my birthday, July 25th, in the Mayan stuff, saying that is considered the day out of time. Which is weird. I don't know if the sun's in a certain position. I don't know what that means.
I don't know. I've never understood that one myself, Dawn. No one's ever explained to me what July 25th.
Month?
Yeah, I have the same birthday as Lisa. You know that.
Yeah, July 25th.
Yeah, but it's for them, and we don't know what age it comes from, but they say that day is considered the day out of time.
See, and that'll be something astrological, like astronomical, like it'll be of that status of information, and that's like a lot of like that's the thing is all we've got to compare things to is this Gregorian bloody calendar, which was made up to account for things. Like it's all accounting time. It's accounting.
It's just assigning it units.
So you know, a lot of these things were marked by other things actually occurring outside of our little fishbowl. You know, it's what my favorite sort of metaphor at the moment is we're in this fishbowl that's floating in this fucking this gigantic sea, and right. Well, essentially, yeah, in another fishbowl, But it's like, you know, you've got your fish tank. Like I've got my fish tank. Now, when it's 40 degrees outside, you know, the temperature outside, what temperature does my water get to? Is it because of the fish shitting and farting and all the rest of it in their water, in their fish tank that's making that temperature rise? Or is it the external forces that are increasing the temperature rise?
The external
and we
forces.
keep looking at our fishbowl. Well, we keep looking at our fishbowl, right?
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
Dawn,
Yes, ma'am.
did you mean July or June?
July.
Hi.
I would have thought if it would have been June, it would have made more sense to me too, because
The
it's
equinox.
exactly.
It has to do with the
No, it's not equinox, it's solstice.
Solstice, sorry, that's what I meant.
It doesn't have to do with that. It's something different. And I just don't know enough about it to.
Well, that's also the time that we go through the Taurid media strip.
And then there's the whole general wrench in the whole equation where linear time really doesn't even exist anyway.
Well, and is July one of the made up months?
Yep.
Can't remember which
Julius.
ones they are.
July for
Yeah,
Julius
and
Caesar.
so that as a month has only been around for a little while. This is where everything makes me crack up. It's like, okay, the calendar moves, but the calendar moves per its block, which is a day. So it moves through and the days are accounted for. We never had that. Like the Gregorian calendar, I can't even remember. It's not even like half a century old, I don't think.
It kind of
It's like
reminds
300 or 400 years old. Like as
I
far
can't
as a
remember when it was
general
brought in.
practice, because you had the Julian,
Julian.
like the French had the Julian calendar, and it was still in competition with the Gregorian calendar before the Gregorian calendar got adopted. You know,
and all these other countries had their own calendars.
Right?
So
Yeah,
Lori
it's
just posted the link there to Wikipedia, the year 1010, that shows you the year 1010 down the right side of the page of what that is, year in the Chinese calendar, the Coptic calendar, the Julian calendar, the Burmese calendar, and it goes on, where they're all different years.
You know, what's interesting?
The analogy that comes to mind is sort of like somebody standing at a river, right? Seeing the water flow by and arbitrarily, visually deciding and measuring how much water goes by, like dividing it all up and saying, oh, this is, it's like, how do you measure a river flowing and how much water has gone by? Like
Calendars are astronomical. There is a link with, it's how long it takes too. But what's very arbitrary is, where it makes more sense to us, let's say us, so-called the white people, like I can't say it any other way, is to look at even what we call the Christian calendars they weren't all like, year zero was 2000, now 20 years ago. Actually, the Byzantium Empire, which was a huge Christian empire, was in the year back then, in 1010, because I looked at Laurie's post, was in the year 6000 something. So they did not measure their Christian calendar from the late birth of Christ at all, nor do the Coptics. The Coptics were the very first Christians. And their calendar is not year
like
zero.
726 to 727.
Yeah, completely. So there are different Christian calendars. They were, and then somehow, probably Nicaea, probably the Roman Empire, and all that did just made time. But again, think that this calendar we're living under, arbitrarily living under now, is not 2,000 years old. It's 1,000 years old. It was imposed sometime in the very early Middle Ages. Very early Middle Ages. Imposed, they decided, okay, this is how we count, this is what the years are, fuck it. And because right now we're in those years, sort of 500-year period in history, which is nothing, where the white man and the Western civilization kind of took over the world, for worse than for better. It tends to be the general view, everybody counts like that, but actually, no. It's just because so-called we, are kind of ruling the world. We're the dominant species right now.
It wasn't until international business really, really took off. Basically, I had a friend of mine who talked about it and said, but not a friend, someone I knew vaguely, said It wasn't until air travel happened. When air travel
They
happened,
needed everyone to,
you needed to be able to say, okay, I'm flying from London to Singapore, that they needed to institute a set calendar across the world for the whole idea of like flights and dates and times, because up until then you had sailing ships, it became arbitrary. And there's a period, and Ben and I had a huge conversation about this back in like fucking 2016, that there was there's all this shit that apparently happened down in New Zealand when the whole crew of them, a bunch of the bigwigs all went down to New Zealand. It was in the late 1700s or the early 1800s. I think it was the late 1700s. And like they talk about the fact of like they literally changed time. Like they needed to be at a certain place at a certain time, so they just changed the date. They literally and they lopped out, and there's a section where it's not highly questionable. How many years did they lop out of the calendar? Because it may have only been 2 or 3, but it may have been more than that. But when you go through and look at it, and they talk about this one place where they went to in New Zealand was called the place that's not a place, and the time that does not have time. And it's this. And then the more that Ben has talked about with different treaties, etc., that seem to all come back to New Zealand, and you go, okay, wait, is there something to this? Is there literally a place where they do these treaties because they do it outside of time, outside of a place?
And another little tidbit to frame your mind around is the whole dual slit experiment thing. Once you measure something a certain way, you're affecting reality and collapsing it a certain way. So before, you used to have all these different civilizations measuring things in a different way, which meant there were different pockets of like
what
reality, basically.
What reality would have really been. He's right on the money, because we are the creators.
Well,
if they can get us to believe in it, then it is.
But
just remember. Sorry, Blair. Just remember that slit experiment, all it proved was that we can measure things.
Yeah.
It didn't mean that you influenced it.
Oh, no,
all it meant was that they built the device that could see it.
But there are newer experiments that show that the person that measures it influences the outcome. They had 2 people measuring the same experiment, and both people different results.
It's just like
because they're observing it.
I know, but it's like the yellow cube. Same thing.
Say again, Dawn?
But just remember,
what?
It's like the yellow cube. Whoever was closest to it was interpreting it was different because of their energetics.
Well, what their intent
there's
was.
that, but it's also just remember, it's their observation.
Yeah.
It's just a different. It doesn't, and I'm not trying to take away any of the power here, but all it actually means is that the measurer was observing it differently.
Exactly.
That's one of the things. It doesn't mean that they influenced it, like what you just said, Dawn. They're looking at it from a different perspective.
Well,
That's the measuring.
Well, research I've done, and and also like Cynthia Sue Larson's stuff, shows that actually people's expectations of what they measure actually does influence what they get.
Yep, their expectations. That's where
the observation point.
Right, but
that's
I know,
the
but I think
actual observation point.
I think we're arguing oranges and tangerines with language at the moment, right?
Potentially.
And potentially. So like that's where
it is interesting him saying, "What is it you observe?" Are we?
Yeah,
that? What are we seeing? What are we seeing?
Because we can only see what our consciousness wants to accept, right? And we go back to that whole thing of like, the Indians standing on the cliff and the ships were sailing in, and the Indians could not see the ships because it was outside of their paradigm. It was outside of anything their brain could equate. And we come back to this thing, is that our brains only take in maybe about 10% of the data to turn it into this picture that we're seeing in front of us. But if shit happens that is outside of our reference point, our brains take it and go, yeah, that's garbage, so we'll just throw it over here.
Or if
Well,
you don't, or like
That doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
do you think the same thing would happen if, say, fucking aliens came down and our friends would be like, oh, what the fuck are you? And you know.
All
Like,
the hardcore Christians, you'd be like, I don't see them. No, I don't see them. They
Think
don't
of it.
exist.
no, but
Think
you
of
know what I
it
mean? Like the
this
whole
way.
fog with the Spaniards and the, just what you're
Yeah.
talking about. Just the Neo shit.
Yeah,
Think-
we have an
think
awareness
of it this
spaceships,
way.
though,
Hold
you know,
on, guys.
things
Let
coming
Ben
out of
finish.
space.
Okay, hold on. Just let Ben. Ben's been trying to get his sentence out for the last 3 minutes.
Just think of it this way. Jeopardy.
The game
The
show.
game Jeopardy.
Okay.
Yes, you're given an answer. You're given an answer, but you can only perceive with what you know. So sometimes you have to update what you know to understand what you're perceiving or comprehend what you're perceiving.
and
This
another
is all I'm sort of getting at. That's the only. It's like, what am I seeing? Oh, we measured it with this. Oh,
But it's
and then there's the layer of like from 1984 that the language influences what you're even capable of thinking. So if you have no words,
for sure.
Yep,
It comes back to that whole pharmaceuticals, government, politician, what all these words actually mean.
Religion.
You know? Right now, everyone thinks that pharmaceutical means that they're going to get fixed, or the moral majority, let's just say, or the majority, right? They think pharmaceutical, they think this is where medicine comes from, they think that, but pharmaceutical means poison makers.
Yeah, did you know that?
It's what it means.
Oops, sorry.
It's what it
death.
means.
It means death.
Sorcerer.
And the white coats, they made them to authority. You know, like, listen to fucking me because I have the answers.
I have the white coat on, so you have to listen to me.
Yeah.
No, white is considered innocent, and it means that so they're doing good. That is why they wear white.
See, but
It's
just
the
remember
illusion
this
of
hair
cleanness.
Yep. Yeah. Ben, exactly.
existed. And this warned us literally against surgeons, pharmacologists, doctors. It literally warns you about it.
I need to print that one off.
I know. I want that too.
I need that printed off and framed and put on my wall.
Yes.
At 1512 AD.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Jane.
Oh, goody.
You need to get a little closer to your mic, hon. You're very hollow.
Okay.
We can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. That would be great to put that document in documents so we can access
It is there, I think.
Oh.
I know I published it on RTS for sure. I put it on. I'm pretty sure I put it in the UnFuckers documents. I don't know.
Title? What's the title?
Charter of Herbalists and.
Oh, I got it. I got it last time Ben brought it up. Okay.
Yeah.
How did we find something from 15 AD? By the way, just curious.
What?
How did we find that from 15 AD? Just curious. Who found that?
Oh, I have people
curious.
that have books.
Okay. You can leave it at that.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Ben has an eclectic library that he collects.
We do too.
Yeah.
I was gonna be, you hop in your DeLorean, you go back to 15 AD, go to whoever made the document, come back.
TARDIS. No, TARDIS. I don't want a fucking DeLorean. DeLoreans are ugly. I'll take a TARDIS.
King Henry.
Nah.
Yeah.
Yeah, DeLoreans are ugly. Yeah.
Now, going back to language, when you really start to understand language, like, worship is the worship and praying is praying, and it like starts, that little fucking creek starts to open in your brain. You're like, holy shit, which one is the universe recognizing?
Well, you know what? Universe recognizes intent. It does not recognize words. And I'm sorry, anyone who wants to go toe-to-toe with me on this one, I will gladly go toe-to-toe. Because it's not about language, it's about intent. Right?
I'll second that.
I think this is more about writing. I'm not
regardless, it doesn't matter. It's still written. I get what people are saying. I totally get. Now, perception is everything. So if you know prey, i.e. to prey upon someone else, is the same thing. You are subtly, unconsciously putting connections together in your own head. Yes. But the whole thing about the universe hears language, the universe
Only
doesn't
if
hear
you speak
language.
English.
The
Only if you
universe,
speak English.
yeah.
The
Because
universe
what
doesn't
the
do
universe
negations
doesn't,
in that shit, you know. Don't
exactly.
ever fall into that loop.
No.
Don't think in terms
Well,
of negation because the universe, you know,
But
that's
hold on, the ancient languages were more guttural, were more sound.
Depends on what they were. There was a,
and I can see why,
but it
But
doesn't
do
matter. They
remember-
still had languagues that had different sounds that made the same thing. Whether there was one word in Greek, there was one in Egyptian, there was one in Chinese, and there was one in
exactly
Ethiopian,
A lot of
and they
those
all
things-
sounded exactly the same, but they meant 4 different things.
Well,
when
the
I
universe
see those
doesn't hear
lists,
language.
Go ahead. Hold on. Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
So while we're on this exact topic, I wanted to point out and make sure that what I'm saying too is not taking away the power of self, right? Because what you guys are talking about right now is like now we're debating about language. Language is what? Language is sound. Sound is what? Something that we can use as descriptive. But what is intent? When does intent begin?
Exactly.
See,
Before
it's
you
like,
put sound to it.
remember the ringing cedars, right? And Anastasia talks about when going essentially, and I know this is going to make it sound kind of bad, but going into preparation for child, like to bear a child. When is the child in? Does it come into inception when the sperm meets the egg, or does it come into being when the parents
planet
start? Well, but that's what I'm saying, Dee. What intent and planning? When does the intent start? When the girl is 4 years old and the boy is 6 years old, like these sorts of things as you go through. So when does that intent start? The same with the slit experiment. When did someone go, oh shit, hey, let's measure and atom? So
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say there's solid scientific evidence that suggests that the brain knows what's going to happen before it even happens. Like there was an experiment where they would show like a really distressing image and a really pleasing image, and they measured the brain's activity. And before the thing even flashed, the brain would be able to prepare and know what, like, if it was going to be, the distressful one.
The trip about that experiment is they measured the heart against the brain, and the heart picked it up before the brain. So and this is what I'm getting at. When does intent begin?
And that's consciousness. I mean, and then is consciousness limited by time? Does time even exist when you're talking about consciousness? And that intent is definitely directly consciousness.
But then we're intermingling things.
Hold on. Okay, let Brianna finish. Let Brianna finish, because again, now she's been cut off about 4 times. Okay, go ahead, Brianna.
That's all right, love. I'll just make a phrase here. It's philosophical. At this level where we're discussing now, it is more philosophical than, because we don't know. But what if, in the real intent, what we, us here, mean by intent is when we really want something to happen and actually make it happen. What if that kind of intent is linked with consciousness? It happens when you make the conscious intent, not just like a wish or, you make a real conscious intent, then it happens. Not when you're just wishfully thinking, to make an opposition phrase.
And that is what I call the observer.
Exact. And that's exactly it. So I got a question here. I want to throw this out, and I think it's so funny that we've gone on to this whole thing of language. Because just today, I was doing one of my Danny in my own head, trying to figure out shit. And does anyone know, and Ben, please, if you figure this out, when did English come into being?
Oh, Well, I have something to say, just not about English, but language, the creation of language, speaking.
No. I want specifically, before we go there, Blair, we'll get there in a second, but English. When did the language English come into being? When was it created? And by who?
I know this, but not off the top of my head. I have to go into my timeline.
I saw an
Old
article.
English, it's like 10,000 BC, around that era. I'm pretty
But
sure
1,000
it was.
BC,
900.
so 1,000 years before
No,
Christ?
80.
Okay,
No,
1,080. Dude,
80,
get your
80.
ADs and your BCs correct, because that's a,
900 to 1,000 AD.
Okay, so but where did it come from?
Okay, one thing I
I'm
saw,
about to
and
show
if
you.
I can find the
Hold on,
article,
hold
I'll
on,
let
Zero.
you know. I'll let you know.
Yeah.
They said English is phonetically backwards from Phoenicians, who have a hand in all of our government and everything else. But it was something about being phonetically backwards sounding than the Phoenicians. It's when you look at English, it is ass backwards from any other language, and on its, the grammar, how things are done in a sentence structure. And that's why it's so hard to learn a different language, because for English speakers only, it's hard to move over to that one because of the structure of it is so backwards. But
Okay, so
I can't
English,
find the article, but it was something.
Honestly,
English
from a
is
foreigner
dress
point of view.
based.
Okay, because Brianna just said, and this is interesting. Okay,
What I put in there, we both did, Jane and I. That's taken from the internet, so
right.
But take it just from a foreigner. I'm a French person. That the first language I learned was French, basically. Then Romanian, because it was spoken in the house. English was only a third language I learned when I was 12, 13 years old. So it's definitely, not even a small early childhood language for me. English was never hard to learn. It's actually, for a French speaker, let's say, it's an easy language to learn. It doesn't have huge, German, which is very close to English because it is what they call the Saxon language, as opposed to, say, a Latin language. German is much harder. English is like English is like a simplified, almost like a simplified form of German, who got very heavy and complicated and huge long sentences. English is filled with modern English. It's filled with 4-letter words. You can, of all the languages I speak, I shit you not, the easiest language to explain something for me is actually English, because it has easy words. You can make a short sentence, a rather short sentence, to explain things very, very easily, as opposed to French, where, very precisely. In other languages, like what they say, the Latin languages are the Romance languages. Yeah, they're more convoluted. Takes longer to explain shit. English is very. That being said, from what I.
Hey, Dee.
Okay, so hold on, guys, because this is the thing I find interesting, and I want to talk about dates, and this is why I asked Ben specifically, and you said it's on your timeline, which plays into this. Okay, we talk. There's the one that Jane just put in here talks about Old English is from 450 to 1100. 450 is the Council of Nicaea. Okay, hold on, Zero. Bzzt. The Council of Nicaea. And we can trace this back. Now, we're talking about the Council of Nicaea was one of those change moments where all of history, everything we know was changed. Everything that was to come was changed. So if they're saying that the invention of Old English started in 450 to 1100, well, now we're talking anything that's from basically, 800 to about 1100 is considered the Dark Ages, where apparently nothing existed. Apparently everyone went back to, digging in the dirt and living in squalor. There were no architects, there were no engineers, and now we highly question if the Dark Ages even existed, historically speaking. Did those years even exist? Okay, and then you have Middle English starting in the 1100s to the 1500s. And again, if you look at that as a time frame, 1100s, 1500s, you're talking about the Renaissance, we're talking about all this shit coming up, and then there's another very distinct change. And if we were to look at all those treaties, etc., that you have on the timeline, Ben, I guarantee you'd see the coincidentally that they meet up, these changes to language.
Oh, they totally do. And just remember, like, it's not so much when the English language was created or came about, because as we know that there are conglomerations of languages, you know, there's Indo-Asian, there's Indo-English, blah, blah, blah. What I always looked at is, when was it enforced?
Okay, and that's a good point.
And that, see, so like you say, it starts off with Nicaea, and this book's created. What's the first thing that went into the is it the Gettysburg Press?
The Gutenberg Press was the Bible.
Gutenberg was the Bible.
Yeah.
So English and Old English, because when the Bible was Latin, the priests had it. The priests read it,
and they were the only ones
who could read it. That was how it rolled. And then this thing happened. And remembering that still, like, up until not that long ago, not many people could read English, for starters. But it was the most mass-produced, enforced language.
And it still is.
Sorry for being annoying, but like, while we're having this conversation, I would just love for Danny or somebody just to screen share this image while we're having this conversation. I think just seeing it.
May I add to that?
Which image?
With I think the consolidation of the English language happened with Francis Bacon and Shakespeare. And the same happened in Spain with Cervantes. Cervantes did the same for Spain as Francis Bacon and Shakespeare did for, and they lived around the same time and had for a certain time the same date of death.
There's a lot of questions I have about that whole period too.
Yeah.
I totally agree. But what the aspect that I'm getting at is Shakespeare was around, but there were certain plays written. His books didn't go into mass production.
Yeah.
The Bible did. I mean, and we know he worked on the Bible, so I shouldn't say.
Yeah.
It's that influence, because it's not just a book that got put out, got to bestsellers and went around the world. It's something that got printed, pressed, bound, and then taken out and enforced, and then taught.
Yeah, Francis Bacon.
That's the part that interests me.
Francis Bacon wrote the James Bible.
Yeah.
Didn't he?
No, well, not officially.
He played a
role in
part in it. Yes.
Yeah. Hey, I think.
But he also played a part in the Constitution of America and a few other bits and pieces too. So.
I think we should screen.
Yeah, I know. New Atlantis.
Screen share with zero. Just put it in there.
Yeah, I've got it up. Hold on, I'll show it. Where the hell? There it is. This shows you this whole thing. So for example, you've got the Germanic, West Germanic, Anglo-Frisian, English is over here, right? And I get that that's what they say, but I'm sorry, as someone who's like, you know, spoken with German people and Dutch people and Bavarian people and people who spoke Afrikaans and Flemish, they in no way, shape, or form sound anything like English. And their structure of their language is nothing like English. So I have a really hard, and this is one of those pieces, I have a real hard time, because I know this. I know the fact that it's supposed to be of the Germanic origin, blah, blah, and the Anglo-Saxons, et cetera, et cetera. there are certain languages, like for example, you look at the Italian, the Romance languages, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, okay, and all the side ones, right? They sound. You can tell that they all came from the same root. When you go to the Slavic languages with the Russian, the Polish, the Czech, the Croatian, the Bulgarian, they sound like they have the same root. You can tell. English stands alone in all the languages, in the way it's structured, in the way it is spoken, written, the rules, grammar rules of English, etc., it stands alone. And that's why I keep asking the question, where does English really come from? Because that, I've looked into it several times, and every time I look at the answer, I'm just like, yeah, no, and same thing. So for right now, I'm reading, and I have been for the last month and a half, I've been reading all the Jack White Camelot books. I'm on book 6 now, which is, I love Jack White. He's a Canadian author, because when he writes, he goes and he spends like basically 10 years doing all the historical studies of the time period, and then he puts that into his stories. So the historical accuracies of the stuff that he puts, granted it's based on what we call history, right? But even though he's written this story and it takes place, it's the King Arthur story, but told from a completely different perspective than any of the romanticized King Arthurs. It's after the fall of the Roman Empire and what happened to England, what happened with basically all the tribal groups within. And as I'm reading this story and I'm reading about, okay, so the Romans spoke their language, their Latin-based language. And then you had like the Celts, and they each had their own sub-languages, but like the tribes that were closer together down, say, for in the south, could understand one another. There were differences between their languages, but you could understand. And for example, one of the tribes that he was very close with, the Pendragons, in the south in Cambria, the main character Merlin learns to speak the language growing up as a child, and when he meets the Scots and the Gaels, their language is close enough that while he has to obviously refine it, he can totally make himself understood. And then he's talking about the Danes, and he's talking about the Saxons, and he's talking about the Germanic tribes coming over. And I'm looking at this and looking at language from that perspective, and I keep coming back to this question of, so where does English come from? Because it just doesn't feel right. The public, historically accepted answer doesn't feel right.
And if you look on that deal you just posted, look how big the limb is that shows English, and there is no branches. And compared it to the size of the rest of them, it's huge.
And did you guys notice why? Okay, first of all, I think that image is fucked up, but like fucked with. But why is the Finnish and the Hungarian another little tiny tree off all the other fucking languages?
Some of the European languages are really off by themselves.
Finnish and Hungarian are weird. That I can tell, because being, Romania is we're bordering with Hungary. We have our deals with them, but their language is, as opposed to my region right now of the world, where it's Slavic, except for us. It's Slavic. All the languages, they do have a lot of similar words because they have the Slavic root. Hungarian is not a Slavic language, and it's Hungarian and Finnish are completely similar, although those two countries are like fucking miles apart.
Miles, like way far apart from each other.
Yeah, I mean, really far. It's like saying people in Maine speak the same as people in Florida, but everything in between speaks something else, which is very bizarre. And it said Doppy mentioned something, I think, because he said it in Doppy language. Sometimes but he said something about, and yes, that's what I heard too, is that like Hungarian and Finnish obviously came from the Mongolian, from the Khan, when he invaded this part of the world, and that for some
brought
reason,
a completely different flavor to the language, completely
exactly
different and unique.
But why are there only like two small islands that speak that kind of language is another bizarre, that nobody really looks at because it's two small countries. But it is bizarre.
And then you just add in the trip of the English language, and I don't know, I mean, you guys have got pretty used to mine, but like going to the States, it's like, huh? What did you say? And that's just accent.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You can do that right here in the 48. Dialect is the word I use a lot. Having been around somewhat, living in different areas, believe me, there's a big difference between the way people speak, quote, English, American English in Maine, compared to the way they do in the mountains of North Carolina, for just to name two. But you could, or the heartland of Texas as opposed to Houston, Texas, for instance. It's similar, but it's, it can get quite hard to understand the local dialects that are going on from region to region to region, out west too. Up in Montana where you were, Ben. They speak English, but it ain't like what you hear on the news, which is Midwestern.
Well, see, I could understand them fine, but I'm guessing that's because I've been Americanized through the movies I watch. However, people ain't been Kiwiized.
You know what, Ben? That always made me think about the languages, even for English, because we all speak English here, obviously, and we all are aware of the different sounds. And it's music. Language is music. It's sounds. It's music, and everybody uses that music differently. And a Kiwi is not going to sound like an Aussie. It's not going to sound like an American English. Definitely not going to sound like a British. Same with the Spanish speaker, Mercy, Sonny. You know the difference between pure Spanish from Spain, and South American, which is they don't speak in Mexico like they speak in Peru, or completely different music. It's the music that changes.
Well,
yeah.
Well,
and my interest would be is where that came from.
Oh yeah.
Here's where I was going with the whole root of language and shit. I've read. I don't know if you guys enjoyed Terence McKenna. I think he was a very wise man. Anyway, he said that he learned from the tribes or in his fucking drug trips or what the fuck ever that we were telepathic first and we created language from fucking mushrooms. That is what he said.
Well, yeah, mushrooms taught us. His theory is mushrooms help teach us the art of sound. See, but the tribes will tell you that the birds taught us, and that the bird tribe gave us language.
It's true, I read that.
You made me laugh, Ben, when you were talking about like English and English depending on where you're from, because when we were in Morocco, I had one friend who was there who was from Alabama, and I had another friend who was there from Yorkshire, England, and I used to have to sit in between them and translate. And they were both speaking English. Neither one could understand. For the first week they would try and talk. They could not understand. It was like they were speaking two completely different language, and I would literally sit in between them and be like, she said this. No, what she means is this. Okay, no. It's this way. Like, because they couldn't understand each other, even though they were both speaking English.
By the way, you guys that are in America think that the English that's spoken in America, with all the different singing sounds, is actually a language that everybody that migrated to America learned by common consent, because some of you people came from Holland, some of you people came from
Italy,
non-English speaking countries at all, and the English that's happened in America is a completely different type of language born out of common consent by people who had all kinds of accents and came from all over the world.
Exactly. Like why the fuck would you create a new language? And like
it wasn't new. It wasn't new. It was the language of the kingdom that owned air quotes, that owned America. It was good, it was Great Britain. It was that English, but so everybody learned that English probably by default, because the Americas, the North Americas, belonged, the stupid French stole Louisiana and all that, so it belonged to the crown, to the British
Sure.
Crown. So I guess that's why people ended up having to learn that stupid language. But
I'm talking about how people say that, you know, English is a combination of German and French and all this other stuff. And
it
I
is a
must say,
Saxon language.
I haven't thought
It
about
is.
this a lot, but I must say, like, what Danny said about English being created and designed is like, my bullshit meter totally went off, like totally. Like that totally. Does anyone else ping with that? Because it's just like, how the hell do you create English out of these supposed, like, I feel like they want us to think that there was a natural evolution.
Exactly.
No.
And I don't see a natural evolution in it. I don't see it. I can't see a natural evolution from the Germanic. Even if you throw in the Latin-based languages, yes, we have words that have Germanic bases. Yes, we have words that have Latin bases, obviously. You can't tell me that English just naturally evolved. It just...
I think it's a control tunnel, personally.
Yeah, I agree.
Makes sense.
Well,
Exactly.
2 points. One, when was the English alphabet created? A to Z. Not like, oh, this is from Aramaic and fucking wah, wah, wah. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. When was that created?
No idea.
And 2, on this whole, I like the way we've said singing, right?
Yeah.
Because like here, we've got there's a bird here. Its colonial name is Willy Wagtail. In New Zealand, we've got them, and they are the colonial name is fantail. The same sort of bird. They're just these little things that fly around. They got a little fantail, right? In New Zealand, the Māori call them piwaka waka. Here in Australia, they're called jiggy jiggy, and the jiggy jiggy is the noise it makes. Jiggy jiggy, jiggy jiggy, jiggy jiggy, jiggy jiggy, and you can actually, like in New Zealand, we used to get a cork and wet a cork and rub it on a glass, and it'd make the noise and it'd talk to it. Here, you try and make its peep noise, like, and it doesn't really do anything, but you go jiggy jiggy, and it jumps over and it starts doing its little thing back to you. So a lot of, like, and this here we're dealing with the originals. So it would seem that sound, replicated sound.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even like a word for imagery, or it's a direct correlation.
Right. The alphabet, Ben, the alphabet was, our alphabet is derived from the Latin alphabet. We just added a few letters. There's no like English alphabet. It's the alphabet that we use, French, English, Spanish, German,
is Latin.
Except for a few letters. It's the Latin alphabet.
Okay, but haven't y'all heard that we only have half the alphabet, like 26, it's where there's supposed to be 52? I'm sure y'all heard that before, right?
Yeah, but where are the other letters? Because I've never heard of them. Except
I don't know what they are.
There's the only languages that have a little bit more alphabet are like for instance Romanian. It has all the normal alphabet, but then you'll have like 2 T's, because there's the normal T that we all use, and there is a sound. They added another T that's a T with a little symbol underneath, because it's the tss, it's to make that tss sound, because it's not T. Then when it looks, it's bullshit like that. Or like
Maltese is an extra 5 letters too, for the same reason. Maltese has got 5 more letters.
Swedes, exactly. The
But
Sweden.
don't look at it as bullshit. They're sounds. That's all letters are.
I mean, they're sounds. Yeah, sorry.
Right.
That's my go-to
and see, this is where the whole trip then comes in. So even if English is rooted in Saxon and Germanic, and that's where etymology comes in.
Right.
So if we have those as points of importance, and therefore they are points of reference, it's like that whole, remember, is it Yaffa Bay? We many years ago, the lady who was doing all that etymology, the doctor, and she went into like the word black, that comes from the word, I think it's BLAC, black, and it means white, like bleached. And bad, the root word for bad means, I think it's an effeminate male or something along these sorts of lines. And these are words that technically the roots of we've lost, and we've gone and black is now this thing
Color.
that we look at as a shade, you know, void of, whereas in actuality it's the source of, not the void of. You know, when you go Goethe versus Newton and that side of things.
So more.
Well,
Yeah.
this is it. Every time, because you know me, I've gone through my rages of like studying etymology, right? Where, and especially with specific words come up, I go looking at the etymological dictionaries to go from where does this word come from? What's its root base? And I'm sorry, when you're looking at English words, I have very rarely have I found a root base of English that is Germanic. It's like the root base of this is, you know, 8th century French, or the root base of this word is, you know, 5th century Greek, or Syrian, Assyrian, or Egyptian. You don't see any English words that are a base of Germanic.
Take a look at the link I just put in, Danny. You might want to screen share it.
Hold on.
Can you also screen share mine too?
Hold on, give me a second, guys.
Says the English alphabet has 52 letters, and it has
Hold on.
pronunciations.
Hold on. I've lost Zoom. Give me a second. There we go. I found Zoom. Okay,
Why
because
was it
I've never heard or seen this before.
Why was it hidden?
So what does this mean?
Yeah, well, it's
What
large
are
and
the
small, so
missing-
it's just 52 letters is just the capital and the small. That's all.
What would be
Just
the
uppercase and
missing letters?
Yeah.
lowercase.
Yeah, it's just
Missing
uppercase and
sounds.
lowercase. Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
But
No.
well, it does because technically uppercase is classified as glossa, which is a certain type of how do we call it? Well, spelling. Spelling. And that's why this comes back to the fact that like your all caps name is written in glossa.
Yeah.
And when you're written in glossa, it's corporate, it's slave terminology,
It's
or
law.
dead terminology. It's why they always use capital letters on tombstones and things like that.
Yeah.
This
That's
is
hilarious.
like it's just the
pineapple.
same as like it's just the same as the Queen's English. That whole including but not limited to. You know, that word changes the structure of an entire sentence.
That looks vaginal. Sorry.
This is just total. This is just total evidence. Another piece of evidence that English is just a fucking chimera of language. Like.
The pineapple thing, you know what it tells me when I look at it, you know, like the whole word says pineapple, which is probably close to what, wherever it initially grew, what the people called it there, and it was picked up, shows you the English colonialist assholery that some drunk idiot colonialist was, you know, looking at it and said, fuck that shit.
Let's call it
I'm
a
going to call it
pineapple.
a pineapple because that's funny. And that was that, you know. Could be as simple as that sometimes.
Yep. Well, this is my whole thing. I would say, going back to English. English is the language of science. It is the language of law. It is the language of politics. This is one of the reasons why I question why English and where it came from. It's the language of medicine. Yes, Jenny, exactly. It's the language of medicine. You can't tell me.
What do you mean by that?
What do you mean? What do I mean by that?
I thought Latin was the language of medicine.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, what do you mean by?
Sorry, I'm mouthful of chocolate here, you know.
Yeah.
In the fact of like when medical stuff is discussed, like you've got Latin stuff, like the bones have got these ridiculous Latin names and that, but when they talk medicine, surgical, et cetera, it's all very English based. Now you can say, okay, well that's because of the influence of the British Empire, et cetera. We can go back to that even with politics, science, etc. You can say, oh, well, it's because of the British Empire controlled so much of the world for so long that therefore English has become the set language. But like when we look at things, for example, science comes from the Greek. Like, let's face it, the greatest scientists in history were the Greeks, the Persians, the Phoenicians. Wouldn't science be based on those languages?
But then,
God.
what the fuck is science? They studied nature.
Yeah.
They didn't have a science to study. Science is a topic box that's been created. Goethe wouldn't have classified himself as a scientist. Nowadays he's classified as a philosopher poet, but technically he did a lot of agronomy, horticulture, all those sorts of things. But he would classify it as natural science or the study of nature. First observe, then copy.
You're gonna like this, Ben. In French school, well, back then, might have changed. Our science classes were called sciences naturelles, natural science.
Yep. Yeah.
And in us talking about language, like, let's make sure that it's like we'll try and be as correct as possible, because science is a topic.
Yeah.
Right, that's created. So we didn't have TVs, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have all these sorts of things. It's just the same as like when we talk about, okay, the time of Shakespeare and what books existed.
The Bible.
You know, and I don't mean manuscripts that, you know, that were one or two or three ofs. I mean books.
Yeah.
And the first mass-produced book was English.
Yeah. That
That was produced by the Roman Catholic Church.
Yep.
Right. So if we're talking about language, we're talking about this sort of stuff.
And
It's
they
like,
got to choose how to
well, the Roman Catholic Church, what does it mean? So the book was produced by Catholic, means universal. Church essentially means bank, etymologically.
Yep.
So it's the Roman Universal Bank released a book.
Well, and it's all about control. I mean, if you look at, like, they got to decide how to translate those words. I mean, if you look at the Hebrew and the Greek and the Latin, like, they all have multiple meanings. And when they did that, they got to totally control how to interpret all of it. And, you know, and you can't just tell me it's a coincidence that.
No, I mean,
there is no coincidence.
No, and there's.
But don't forget, we're talking right now, when we're talking about this, which is exactly what happened in Europe, only in Europe. And then, of course, what became all of the American continent and later Australia and New Zealand, but it's only in Europe. At the same time, out in the Middle East, they had, when here in the Middle Age universities, they had like the richest university had 70 books, and that was like, oh wow. And like Ben said, they were all manuscripts written by monks of religious texts, biblical stuff.
Well, just
out in the Middle East, they had thousands of books. They had all the knowledge of the ancient astronomy, astrology, the science of you know, healing and everything. They had thousands of manuscripts, but they were forbidden here. We didn't have
but
them.
most of them were one-offs as well, right?
Oh yeah. No, they copied them. What they did is that when Islam started growing, the mosque, the initial mosque was actually a university. They were learning centers. There was a religious thing in the middle, but the rest was all about, and these guys started copying everything they had from the ancient Greek philosophers, all of Plato,
Persians.
all of that. We know.
And
which also really begs the point that it's really genius to use a modern language like English as for science, because it actually really doesn't make sense, because most of science is not in English. All the ancient texts, not English. And so if you get to choose a modern language to translate everything into, you basically get to control how everything is perceived. Like all those, like science has been around forever.
Aaron, the whole world does not
100%.
speak English. The whole planet does not speak English. Don't forget.
But they do in science.
But they're trying. They are.
They're trying. They're really trying.
What I'm saying is that, like, all those ancient texts in Hebrew, in Greek, like the world science going back to thousands of years, all that has now been translated into English, and that's
Also,
what they're using.
not only.
No, but
Not only
Brianna,
from
that
no, no.
from us,
English
that's what
is the
it
language of
seems like.
science. All science takes place.
Well,
There are in many, many languages.
no, I
Nowadays.
wouldn't
no
even say
words in those
science.
languages for these science. I know,
All
Ben. I know.
so-called modern science.
Religion. Religion. It's the language of religion.
And control.
So basically, we have to get the Vatican.
But once again, so science is a topic that's created under English, right? English is a subtopic of religion. Religion, the word means to reliege, to reassign your, right? What I'm sort of getting at more so, Brianna, is like now there are millions and millions of copies of one sort of book, and there's millions and millions of books. So yeah, they started copying the manuscripts, but not everyone could read them. Not everyone had access to them. That's all I'm sort of getting at. Is just there was this one point in time where this one language released by this one sect went out en masse in a mass way. That's there are all the languages of the world, and I would say that the way that the inception of like the Bible and which was written in Old English, because there wasn't a lot of Latin copies available, there still aren't, the way that was infiltrated, I'd say that they failed. I'm going to say that their goal was to take over the whole world with that language, but it's the way that it's been put out, because essentially it's like the my levity story and the Academia del Cemento and the Declaration Against Levity, and taking that out of our language, like just those simple bits there, after X amount of generations, become something forgotten. So that word of levity and uplifting and levitation and the opposite and equal to gravity have been totally taken out of our context. Because we haven't been brought up with those things, it's hard to observe or intuit that aspect of things as well.
And
it's interesting
point too is that like the languages of Hebrew and Greek and the languages of ancient science were written with multiple layers of meanings. And
Hebrew was not a real language. Sorry, it was only a religious language. Aramaic was. Hebrew never really existed.
Sorry, man.
Yeah, no, it's all right. I'm just putting it out because there's so much.
It is a misnomer.
Nowadays.
Yep.
It's a misnomer, and it's used, to brainwash us today about a certain state that fucks up half the world.
Okay, yeah. So Aramaic.
Sorry.
No, fine. Like Aramaic.
The ancient languages, yeah.
So like Aramaic, Latin and Greek and the languages of ancient science were written with multiple meanings, like layers of meanings. And if you just look at how many translations of the Bible there are, you can totally see how the person that translates gets to decide what it means. And they get to choose what layer of meaning it is. And so,
okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Blair. Sorry.
What do you think language is, now I don't know if air quotes are appropriate here or not, blocking us from?
I think a lot of things.
One thing, certainly, one thing I can tell you, sometimes it could be as stupid as, exactly as Aaron said, it can be as stupid as the perspective, only that, the perspective of the person translating, and a perfect example is the ancient Greek philosophers. Most of them were translated into English around the 1800s. That's when widespread translation of Greek philosophy was done in English. So by the people of that time. Guess what happened? This is why the fucking Odyssey sometimes sounds like a goddamn chick flick. It's a super philosophical book. It's not a chick flick. It sounds like that because the idiots who translated it from ancient Greek to then modern English in the 1800s
turned it into a romance.
Yes, they made it sound so. It's a perfect example,
Like, hold on. So going back, Blair. I just want to go to Blair's thing. What you just said. That goes back to my whole thing of where did English come from? Because we are lacking terms. We are lacking words to be able to describe certain things. And I think the words that we lack in the language are deliberate. Because if the words are taken out, like Ben said, if levity is taken out of the language, then that concept, poof, disappears. So if we take certain words and we never ever give them an English translation, an English meaning, if those words don't exist, then there's certain concepts that have disappeared from our observation, our perspective.
Right. I think it's
So-
even more than language. Like we're not touching fucking levels that haven't been touched in fucking I don't even know how long.
So
You know what I
on
mean?
that note, we know scientifically that certain sounds, remembering words are meant to be spoken, right? Spells are written, words are spoken. We know scientifically that certain guttural sounds, these sorts of things activate different receptors in the brain, just the same as bitter tastes in food activate different sectors of the brain. So yeah, we are missing all sorts of stuff, but it's sounds, it's not words.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's sounds, it's not words. And then look, if we go back into like, you know, let's go woo-woo as sounds. What do we live in? We live in vibration.
Yep.
We live in wavelengths. We live in these things. So let's just say we can't see because we can't sound them. If you can sound them, you can see them. So there are things that may exist that we haven't activated. So how many, if we're only using 10% of our brain or 25% of our brain or 1% of our fucking brain, are the rest of the activations found in tastes and sounds that then activate sight?
Well,
Which is
'cause our
why we
eyes-
used to all come together in corroboree and sound and
Right.
ceremony and dance.
And we know that the brain interprets sight according to that little minimalistic bits of information that it accepts. And then it translates what it accepts within our perception to create this picture that we see.
Well, yeah.
So, take it.
And one tiny little fact is that, like, look at a list, try and memorize it, try and think of that same list like 3 months later. You've forgotten it. Think of it. Make up a song to that list. It's in your brain forever.
Yeah.
So, then get into the trip of life. When taking plant medicines, are they providing you chemical or are they providing you wavelength? And therefore, if they're offering frequency and we can harmonize with those frequencies internally, can we then activate that same thing? And therefore, our medicine playing us a tune that we could sing that can activate the same thing, like in ceremony, in corroboree, in dance.
Ben, it's my little internal theory, and I'm quite sure many of us think of that, is when and big air quotes on, we lost telepathy. I don't think we lost it. I think it was purposefully, distanced from us somehow. And we'll have to go back. Yeah, we'll have to go back one day, because I heard you from afar when you said something about the big electrical discharge coming from the pyramids. It pings, but not now. Another time. The sound when we lost. Let's just use lost for the sake of the conversation. When we lost telepathy, and we started using that organ called, the voice, the vocal cords, to speak, to communicate with each other, this is when we started losing our abilities to tone and to emit frequencies with our mouths, because that's what we were doing with our mouths, not talking to each other. We're using it for frequencies, for you know, from anything practical to probably lifting fucking stones, to lifting stuff, to levitate stuff, to you know where I'm
I
getting.
hear what I
And we're
hear
conditioned into it.
exactly what you're saying. However, I've got to add in there that language was a gift from the birds. In the story, it was never a curse. It was a gift.
It would have worked if
And-
we hadn't
and
lost
it-
the telepathy. You're right. It would have perfectly worked. It wouldn't be. It wouldn't be antinomic.
Confusion. We wouldn't be confused over I say one word and you perceive it one way and I perceive it another way, because telepathically you would know exactly what I meant by that word.
Exactly. The telepathy always would complement, because you cannot say, it's very hard to put a concept into words. Telepathically, you show a concept, you show it via images, colors, sounds, whatever. You got the, you know, you can send a concept out. The person gets the concept as it is in your mind and gets to observe it as you observe it.
I would almost say that true communication, whether it be vocally or energetically, they're the same thing. So via sound, just because there is sound doesn't mean that telepathy isn't, like, do you get what I mean? It's like chicken and egg.
Yeah, it's not. One doesn't stop. Do you notice how even today in our stupid languages, whatever they are, when we communicate with each other, sometimes when we want to tell somebody of a feeling we have, sometimes we use sounds even today, stupid sounds, you know, like it felt like ew, but we use that sound to convey how yucky it was, you know, it was ew and all kinds, you know, oh, it felt so like, ah, okay, there we go.
Or that
sounds.
dinner was just so,
We still do that today. So imagine how we did it when we could. And we
think
can go there again. We can get back to that. Well, and we call our how does Anne call it? Our special powers.
And one thing it seems like we've lost along the journey is that if you look at classical physics, all the equations completely match. When you switch from a matter, physical-based matter reality to a wavelength reality, wavelength sound frequency reality, like all the, not just quantum physics, like even the regular physics equations all match if you switch to that model. And one thing that science has done is totally abandoned that model that everything is sound and frequency.
Well, two things. One, let's just say we still do it, Brianna, but we lost confidence because we got given this other fucking language that we needed to try and fucking comprehend.
Exactly.
Because if all those examples, we still do. So we still do it. We just have lost confidence.
We can do it. We did. You're so right. And the you know, the 10% of the brain and the other 90%. That's what the idea 90% is. It's not that it's untapped and uncharted territory. It's territory we lost somehow. Let's not go into detail now.
Except
we still have,
there.
But we don't necessarily comprehend what.
Do you know where we do use it? Do you know where we still use it? When we talk to babies and when we talk to our pets. When you talk to a baby, everyone does it, you can't help it. You have a tone that you use, there's sounds that you make. When you talk to your pets, when you talk to babies, we automatically, and I defy an adult, we automatically revert to this
childlike state.
These beings don't necessarily understand our words, so we're going to revert to using the tones that we instinctively know they will understand.
I would add to that, Dee.
Yes.
And say that we still do that, because, you know, even with an animal, you could literally be like, and it would do exactly what you wanted it to.
Yep.
And just quickly, Zero, you were talking about the maths. Now, if the falsehood that we live under is correct, just remember Newton came up with some shit. He came up with some equations for something, but he left out the other half. Einstein came along, who philosophized stories, who his cousin wife wrote out into equations. within mathematical things, you've got to remember. So in multiplication, you can only multiply. 1 times 3 does not equal 4 under multiplication.
Yeah.
So then Einstein came up with the theory of relativity to prove the theory of gravity. Quantum physics came up to prove the theory of relativity, and then string theory was created to prove quantum theory. So they're all inside a certain scientific mathematical equation. It's the same with GPS. Once you have a grid and you draw it out, it doesn't matter whether it's a bit here, a bit here, a bit over here, and a bit over here. You can draw a grid out and make it all look like it's exactly here. And then if you go from grid point 1 to grid point 2, there's Africa. And if you go from grid point 3 to grid point 4, there's fucking Alaska. But Alaska might, you know what I'm saying? So within mathematical equations, you can create answers as long as you do them within those mathematical equations. Now, a lot of our physics can't explain 90% of most things. Like, we can't even really explain electricity still, but we can use it, but it's not what people think, and it doesn't actually act the way that physics describes it. And that's coming out more and more and more now. So the equations we're given within those things to prove shit are just crumbling by the wayside.
Sure. I just think it's interesting that we chose I just think it's interesting that science decided to choose the pixel reality versus, or like the point reality rather than the wave reality. Like, when they could have chosen the other one, but they didn't.
Well, also remembering they're still updating or trying to.
Well, if they'd be allowed to, you mean?
Well, you know,
the uphill battle all the way.
You've still got Eric P. Dollards. It's just that most people don't want to hear it and don't want to believe it. You know, the internet's giving us more access. I mean, if Tesla was out now, would we be listening to him? Because we have Eric P. Dollard and there's not a lot of people listening to him. You know, you've got your Zarkovas talking about the sun. You've got, you know, Dallas and the boys talking about it. Everything needs a scapegoat at the moment. Whereas, and it doesn't seem that, oh, well, maybe we fucked up, or maybe we're looking at things wrong, or whatever's going on. It's a very interesting, because we've got information. Like, it is there. It's just how
it's just mistranslated.
I guess. Well, we don't necessarily have the language.
Exactly.
To prescribe to it.
Going back to what I said about English, I believe these words have been deliberately left out of our language so that we can't translate it. So that when we have
the Woo community was completely created to discuss this.
But half the problem we have in the Woo community is trying to define
terminology. Yeah.
Using terminology, trying to define concepts that are outside of our language. So we're crippled and have to continuously use other words, not exact words, words that have been used to define other things, to try and redefine those words so that we can get a point across to communicate, to translate this piece of knowledge, this piece of information. That is the biggest downfall that I talk about all the time. And then we get back to, you know, like, we have intent and we do how we get certain things across. And God knows I'm one of the queens of, like, stumbling over my own words when I'm trying to put an idea out there. Just going back to what I originally said, I honestly believe that this was done on purpose. That is why English was created, and why they tried to push English to be the control language, if you will. Again, politics, science, all these different things. Computers, if you talk even computers, it's all English. It's not. I mean, I watched a video with a Japanese guy trying to explain this new processor, and they've got the translator there, and you're listening to him, but it was like all the actual tech words he was using in Japanese were English.
An example that comes to mind is that English, the problem with English is that there are too many meanings for, like, one word has too many meanings. God or love. Like certain languages have like 9 different types of love. They all specify with different words. And
Yeah,
English is like,
invasion of the vowels. The invasion of the vowels.
Oh, there were vowels in quite a few ancient cultures. It's how they pronounced them and how they said them. But once again, those are vowels are represented by letters. When did letters come in? But D, the other thing is it was enforced. The Roman Catholic Church unleashed itself upon the world, like
exactly, and that's
this is it. It's not like a whole bunch of fucking dudes shaved the middles of their heads and went out in robes as paupers, and we're like, hey, we're gonna do really fucking nice things and lead by example, and we really hope that you all jump on board. It was like,
no,
they burnt motherfuckers. They slaughtered that shit. Like it was infiltrated and done deliberately.
And that's what I'm saying. When they say that Old English was begun in 450, I'm sorry, you can't tell me it's just coincidentally Old English just happened to appear around the time of the Council of Nicaea.
Which is basically
when Constantine was like,
hey, let's create a new religion and let's create a holy book.
And let's start the golden standard. Let's split the military from the politicians so that they no longer talk. Let's do all these things.
And can we just call Can we just call the Council of Nicaea what it is? AKA, let's tell the world how to think.
You know, they burned down the Library of Alexandria in 48 BC.
Okay, but here's the thing, Dawn. One of the things that most people don't know, one of the universities that held more ancient knowledge than anywhere else in the world, other than China, because obviously no one fucking knows what's going on in China. In our modern day world, the university that contained more ancient texts, all the ancient texts on science, on math, on the so-called natural sciences, etc., was in Yemen. And it was destroyed by the Saudis. They firebombed it in late 2015.
That's terrible.
Okay, and no one knows that this university existed. It was one of the oldest existing universities in the world. They had manuscripts there that they still use, that were still being translated out of the ancient texts into Arabic, that were thousands of years old. Okay, so you talk about the Library of Alexandria. No, we have a modern day one. And Yemen, that's one of the reasons why Yemen was bombed, was to destroy that library, because they lost
stuff from Alexandria. I bet.
But could be. You could very well be right.
Yeah.
But just remember, and I really want to fucking big ups all the fucking First Nations in the world, because their stories go back tens of tens of thousands that all this written shit is based on. This is where the documentation started, when they decided that they needed to start recording all this shit. Yes, it goes back that far. They've been cavorting backwards and forwards for
and that's one of the reasons why the fucking Romans went in and wiped out the Druids.
Yeah.
You talk about the Druids. The Druids weren't just in England. The Druids were all over Northern Europe.
The Pharaohs.
And the Pharaohs.
Danny.
And the Phoenicians.
Than Northern Europe. They were all over Europe, from what today we call Ireland. So that would be northwest Europe, all the way to here. Old Romania was shamanic, druidic. long before
And they
it
were
was
wiped out
Christian.
by the Roman Empire.
Same,
Why?
it was completely Celtic, same type of Celtic,
Mhm.
same lore, same, the big guy with the white beard, with a staff, with a wolf, all the symbols, the same, and the
Well,
Celtic crosses and not.
Okay.
So
The
There's
reason,
I-
the reason
bigger
that
than we think.
hold on, just let me finish. The reason the Druids were wiped out is because the Druids had trained themselves to be able to recite all the songs, to recite all the history, and they specialized. And you were in a different school, and whether you were these Druids were specialized in the historical, and they memorized thousands of songs, and each song told a piece of lineage, told a piece of history, and they had to be able to, word for word, they were not allowed to get one word wrong, and they had the entire Druidic training had to do with being able to train the mind to remember every piece perfectly, and that's why they were wiped out by the Romans.
Because you can't
The
erase
Romans couldn't. You can't
learn
have
math.
these people who keep records in their head and
You have to-
were
Well,
known and
you have to
revered by all the local people. Everyone knew a Druid wouldn't lie. A Druid would never lie. If a Druid said something, well, that was the fucking truth. It didn't matter what some governor from Rome said.
burning that
They
library.
still exist.
Burning the
Hold
Druid.
on, Deb
I-
wants to get in here. Hold on, Deb. Yes.
Oh, this is kind of left field, but it kind of tells you what the Vatican is. They built it smack dab where Caesar's circus was. That blood-soaked evil area, it is right smack in it. So it kind of gives you a good feel of what their frequencies are.
Yep.
They
But
thrive
just
on that
remember
blood.
Just remember that they also bulldozed the something like 13 mountains to create the 7 mounds, and they filled in something like 12 rivers so that there were only 7 rivers. And that same thing has been, excuse me, has been replicated across the globe,
And that
where
changes
they
the
literally
frequency,
fill
right?
in
Yeah.
completely.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Completely.
And what is
Completely.
the energy? That's a question I have genuinely. What's the energy of the fucking 7 hills and whatever rivers? Because Rome did what Jerusalem did. It's same hills, it's the same topology, if you wish, same geography.
Are they
Well,
creating the
and
typology
then-
to mimic a frequency?
Exactly.
Or
What
the
of
7
what?
sisters.
There's something that but the 7
interesting.
sisters are yummy, whereas when you go to Jerusalem or Rome, it's yucky.
It's yucky.
Believe
Yeah,
me,
but
in
just
Jerusalem,
remember,
there's something. It's so yucky. So I don't use the word
just
evil.
remember there has to be
Sorry.
an ounce of truth in it.
Yeah,
So just
yeah.
because they're replicating it doesn't mean it's with good intention.
Hmm.
True, right? But
Yeah.
And
isn't it ironic that the so-called for the West, for the huge millions and millions of people who call themselves Christians, the holiest place is Jerusalem, and that place is, and for millions of Muslims, it's absolute holy place. And for millions of Jews, it's an absolute holy place. So it's the holy place of the 3 principal religion of this world, except the East and Buddhism.
Arabic.
and that.
Abrahamic religions.
Abrahamic. And when you go to Jerusalem, if you ever one of you goes there one day, go touch that wall. Go to that thing they call the Western Wall, which was never a wall of the temple, never. But that's, it doesn't matter. But go and touch it though, because there's something. You're all very sensitive people. See what you feel. Because what I picked up was something so ancient, so dark, so fucked up. And I would even go as far as to call it ancient tech. It's tech. It's not like, there's some kind of monster living there or something. It's fucking ancient tech, but it's malevolent tech. It's tech used to distort, and the rest would have been, replicas and like enhancers, like they do with cell phone towers, sending the signal one to another, and just, piggybacking.
Brianna, the
I
same
don't know.
thing. When I went to Gigantea Temple, when the UnFuckers came here, and we went to Gigantia, which is purportedly one of the oldest temples in the world, right?
The underground ones.
Not the underground one. No. This is the one that's here in Gozo, which is above ground.
Okay.
I need to get to the Hypogeum. I really, really do before we leave. Gigantia, and we went, and you get this because there's all this. Oh, it's this mysticism, and you get all this. They create a lot of woo around it, like so. There's even Francis Alosio, who took us on the tour, who's written all these books. He has, in a way, he's romanticized it. And maybe perhaps originally it was a spot that was of a high energy, high frequency. Maybe it was. But when we went there, Nick and I both said it. It was dark. It felt like blood sacrifice. It felt like nasty. There was nothing nice feeling about that place. It didn't feel good. Exactly. Mercedes was there. That's right. Mercedes, you were with us. It didn't feel good. There was no, yeah, and Jenny was there too. So it didn't feel good. It didn't feel like, oh, wow, uplifting. Because, I mean, you come, everyone goes to, there's spots that you go to, wherever you are, and you can feel, and it's got really good energy. This place does not have good energy. And I tried to talk to Francis about it and say, well, I mean, has it been screwed with? I.e., we know that the power people, the controllers, they do that. They find a place of very high energy, and they'll put something on top of it to distort it, to destroy that energy center, and that's what Gigantia feels like.
I just had a ping moment. Can I share real quick?
Yeah.
It just occurred to me, oral histories can't be Mandela affected.
Yeah.
Interesting. And we can go into that because I had a fuck of one this week. I almost lost my fucking shit this week. But another conversation, I guess.
Danny,
go ahead, Blair.
When I was with he who shall not be named, and I'm not talking about Vault.
Yeah.
And Peter confirmed that I was there energetically, protecting that. Yeah. That place was dark. I saw it. And underneath some part of Malta, I don't know if it was a dream or a vision. It's been a while now, but I saw a man in a fucking, I don't know if it was a gold cube or a fucking, it was definitely gold fucking, or it was a cube or it was a fucking
cage.
Yes, and it was like anti-radiation, like a big lead thick glass window, and it was an old man inside. Just throwing that out there. Just throwing that out there.
I wanted to add to
yeah, Mercedes.
I saw a lot of faces there, and I felt the pain and sorrow, and it wasn't faces, actual faces. It just, as I closed my eyes, I saw faces, and I saw suddenly a painting, an old painting of a very known person. I thought it was one of the presidents of the US, but I think it was more one of Europe. And I thought, and I looked for it, and it was, as far as I remember, Fürst von Metternich, who was, Fürst von Metternich is one of the creators of the New Europe after Napoleon was cast out. So, but how he plays into this, so I also saw something there, also a man, which seems to be connected to this place, but I don't know how.
The story about the missing school children, that is the Hypogeum. It is a well-known piece of local folklore that the old people do talk about, and it purportedly happened different reports between the 40s and the 50s, and that was in the Hypogeum, and that is the temple that's on Malta, the main island, that is the underground cavern one, and you see a lot of posts. Very funny, all of a sudden, in the last 6 months, it's like there's a shit ton of posts and videos, etc., all coming out about the Hypogeum temple, and I don't know why now. But yes, it was a school teacher took a group of children down, and they went down into the caverns, and they were never seen again. Now, one of the other ones that happened is another group of, and again, you're not sure if it's school teachers or if it was just people. It's hard to the stories get distorted. And there was a group of them, about 5 or 6 or 7 of them. They went down, and they were down, and they got lost within the catacombs underneath. And this one woman apparently crawled through, which was a smaller opening, and she crawled through, and it came out over like a ledge overlooking a massive chasm that she couldn't see the bottom of. And while she was like sitting there with her candle, shadows went by of like huge giants, like 25, 30 foot tall type giants went marching by. And the same thing, she apparently screamed, they pulled her back, and she like lost her mind. Like she never ever recovered from it.
Oh, my platypus, Danny, what did Gail see that night?
I know. We've discussed this because the giants were found here. This is the old documentation talk about they found giant skulls, massive giant skulls, and they found oblong skulls, the big alien looking skulls. And they have all disappeared out of the museum. Every one of them. They completely, the Maltese government, until actually it was just this year, an article came out that mentioned it. And it was like, oh my God, did they just like kind of quasi sort of confirm that they did have these unusual skulls? Of course, they didn't explain how they were unusual. They just said unusual skulls. But the only documentation is there was 2 German archaeologists, thank you, apparently I don't speak English anymore. 2 German archaeologists came in the late 70s, early 80s to document and study the skulls. Their paper is still in existence, although apparently there's only like 4 or 5 copies of that around it now. But the actual skulls themselves are gone. But the paper is still in existence that proves that they had been sent there. They'd been invited to come by the Maltese government to examine the skulls, etc., etc. So yeah. The whole giants type thing in Malta is a very, very old, big deal.
By the way, Danny,
yeah,
since when do you do the faux Livia look?
Olivia? What do you mean?
Faux Livia. Since when do you do the faux Livia?
In what way?
Hair. Okay, the jacket up, the hair under the jacket.
I'm cold. That's why.
Reminds you of somebody? Yeah, but does it remind you of something? Guys, we just watched it. All the seasons. Yeah. What was the difference when they want to make sure we understood we were looking at the Olivia, the original, and the other Olivia?
Do you want here? Okay, I'll pull my hair out of my jacket. I'm just trying to keep my neck warm.
That was cute. It was very cute. It was very French.
It's only 7 degrees here right now.
When you have red hair.
It was only 7 degrees here today. It's down lower than 7 degrees now. I have 3 pairs of socks on. My feet are freezing at the moment.
That story you told me, not me, all of us, about the fucking children going into where the fuck ever, give me the flashback of that Mandela effect of those child crusades where they just fucking disappeared off to fucking nowhere. Which also is, I have many questions.
Yeah.
Sorry guys, I'm still hung up on the oral histories thing. Like, in my mind, oral histories can't be erased. You can't just burn them. You know, they can't be traced. It's not like, oh, this is the book with the knowledge. Like, you don't know who knows the songs.
But they can be warped, right? And that's what they've done now. So, for example, So my friend who is now a chief in Six Nations, who I did the show, I had him on a couple of times on the show during 2015, the Hokitok. He talks about the First Nations in Canada and how their story has been destroyed and how they've sent over generations that, you basically the old people die out, the younger people, and he said, like he talked about the one that he told me about that it was so shocking, and he said that him and his brother went to one of these big public powwows. And he said he never used to go. Why would he go? It was a big public thing. It was kind of like going to your own people doing trained circus acts, right? It was stupid. And he went, and they started doing a very significant dance. And him and his brother was sitting there, and they were like, why are they dancing in the wrong direction? They're dancing in the wrong direction. What the fuck are they doing? They're dancing in the wrong direction. And he was like mortified, like whatever it was. If they were supposed to go on clockwise to call in the good energy, they were going counterclockwise, which was doing something. And he said, like, he said to the guy who was kind of leading the dance afterwards, he was like, what were you fucking doing? And it was like, well, that's what we were told to do. Who told you to do this? Well, the representative of First Nations bands from the Canadian government who organized this powwow came in and did. So you're right, you have the oral traditions, but unfortunately what you can do is you can, using Canada and America as an example, you can destroy the people. You can, basically put them in such condition where it's like drugs and it's alcohol and extreme deprivation, take them away to residential schools so they don't have the influence of their elders. They don't hear these stories from their elders. You wipe out the elders, and then all of a sudden you have generations of children who don't know the old stories.
And that leads into my second point, which is, and I totally think that's, yeah, exactly. And that leads to my second point, which there seems to be a trend that any civilizations that used oral histories have been erased. Can we talk about, can we talk about the list of civilizations that used oral histories? I mean, there's the Druids erased.
They all did.
Native Americans practically erased.
They all did, because writing was not used commonly until just the last few hundred years. Other than that, writing was not, the common man didn't know how to read. Even the priests and the clerks who copied the Bibles and hand wrote them, most of them were illiterate. They copied the letters, not having any clue. They couldn't read what they were writing. They were just copying the letters down. Right?
It does seem like there's an agenda to erase oral history completely.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, there was only really ever need for oral history because you lived in your communities.
Exactly.
Storytelling.
Well, it would seem that things were, in one fashion or another, harmoniously agreed to. There were borders, right? And I don't mean borders like today. There were, like in Australia, they call it country, right? So every tribe or mob had its country. It wasn't the whole of Australia, and there were 500 of them, or 500 plus. And Australia was dissected up into these tribal, family, clanship areas. And that's how Australia was managed. And I would say that it came to that under lots of, practice and and you used to cross, if you were crossing into other tribal lands or clanship lands or country, there were, I guess, common practices. So, most of these things were bordered by creeks or rivers and things like that. So on your side of the river, you'd light a fire so that the smoke went up, so that the other tribe on the other side could see that you were there, and it might take days or weeks, but you waited for them to give you permission. Otherwise, you could expect something to not necessarily nice happen to you.
Yeah.
So,
Ben or Danny, I got a question. Listening to this, it seems I get the distinct impression this has been going on for at least a couple thousand years. meaning going back to the Romans, which is Constantine. And it may have very well have been, although our discussion hasn't, gone much further back than that, and it may have predated that by quite a bit as well.
The Greeks too, yeah.
Yeah, the point I'm trying to get at, or the question I want to raise about all of it is, for 2,000 years, let's keep it at that. That takes a hell of a lot of coordination and a lot of control over not just one little local group out of Rome, but the whole freaking world. Like, you've got the British doing their thing in the Americas, like North America, Canada, and you got the Spanish and the Portuguese doing a version of the same thing in South America. And then, of course, we know the history in that sense. It's a worldwide thing, and it's over like thousands of fucking years. They don't just, lifetimes are what, 80 years, 70 years, depending how far back you go. They used to be like 50 years, not so long ago. I mean, my grandparents and your grandparents were probably, their expectancy wasn't 70 or 80 years. A lot of them did live that long, but a lot of them didn't even make it out of into their teen years too, to balance that all out. In one lifetime, no man comes to that power, that knowledge, and then can sustain a program for 2,000 fucking years.
The Roman Empire was a very interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, no kidding.
Families do though, Maury.
Yes, they do, and that's where you get.
I haven't quite got to my question, if you will, which is basic. I set it up, but basically, who's running this show is the real question.
Yeah, the same people who started it 2,000 years ago, or probably even earlier. This is one of the things that the more I read, the more I research. People like to make the little quips of, the Vatican rules everything. Except the more that we go back and the more you study the treaties and you study all these different things, you realize that the Vatican actually does rule everything. And when you read, for example, I find very coincidentally that I'm reading this series of books that takes place in England from 400 AD onwards, when they talk about, for example, how the religion was spread, and then what became of that, because you convince people of a religion, then you convince people that, there's hellfire and there's heaven and your eternal soul, and you had to save it. And then if anyone came up to question the edicts of the church, which is one of the side stories that goes on within the series of books that I'm reading, is you have an argument between two different factions within the church that literally comes down to a war within the church, and one faction loses and the other faction goes out and goes, yeah, he was wrong. Anyone who believed what he said, if you continue his heretical beliefs and teachings, you will be excommunicated, you will never go to heaven, you will be cursed to hell, etc., etc. You have the small country folk who basically they don't.
Community.
Well, and so this is the kind of thing. So it doesn't take that long. It really doesn't take that long. And when you can set it up as it was, and you sit there and go through and you go, okay, here we go. Council of Nicaea, we have the Romans, we have the spread of religion go through. The Roman Empire didn't fall. It just changed the corporation from the Roman Empire to the Vatican. They just became incorporated and took on a new name. That's all it did. And it's still just as powerful now as it was during the time of Julius Caesar and Augustus, etc. So these things are insidious, and because we always want to look at them as different. We always want to look at, okay, well, the French did this, and the Portuguese went here, and the Spanish went here. And so you look at, for example, okay, well, you've got the French and the Belgians, so they went down and they took over parts of Africa. But the reality of it is they were all controlled through Rome. They were all controlled through the Vatican. The French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Italians, the British. It was all controlled through Rome. So it didn't matter where those empires went to. They weren't separate empires. We perceive them as separate empires, but the reality is the controllers who controlled those empires were the same, and they're still the same to this day.
Just a different mask.
And they're
different party dress.
They're the ones that created. They're the ones that created science, and Took all those bits and pieces
And
in,
language.
schooling and
far as I'm concerned.
education and those particular things.
Danny, do you
Yeah,
think
love.
there's a possibility that our perception of time is something they engineered, and the amount of time that has actually passed is a hell of a lot shorter than what it is, what they're telling us? They're just giving us the perception that it's longer.
I think so, because like I said, when I went through the whole history stuff and we started really pulling apart that in like 2015, 16, and you start reading these guys who are sitting here, and not in English, mind you. That's the funny part of it. Most of the documentation that is now coming out now, i.e. being translated into English now, is coming out of Russia. It's coming out of places that don't speak English. And you have them talking about the fact of, these, like especially out of Russia, the guy who was the professor of languages who was assigned to, in the late 1800s, to the university in Moscow or St. Petersburg to go and organize all these religious texts and all this historical stuff. And he walked out and went, we have a problem here. See, these 300 years that you talk about from here to here, they didn't exist. And I can prove it. And he wrote massive. So we've got huge chunks of time. There's a very good chance that there's been an entire 1,000 years that was inserted into our thing. That the whole Dark Ages never existed. If you look at it logically, if you actually look at it, it makes no sense. Nothing about the Dark Ages makes sense, and they try to pass it off. Oh, well, there was this plague, and because everyone got sick and started dying, they basically lost the ability to make music, lost the ability to paint, lost the ability to build bridges, lost the ability to build roads, lost the ability to... Really? But then all of a sudden, the Renaissance turned around and boom, all of a sudden, they built beautiful bridges again. And isn't it funny how they looked exactly like the same bridges that were built by the Roman Empire in like 30 BC? But they were built in France in, 1100 and 1200. Wait a second. No, this doesn't happen. So, yes, our perception of time has been totally warped.
And
I'm going to take it further and really go fucky in your head. I don't know that anything existed prior to 100 years ago.
I agree.
All those people have been doing the mud flood things. They're starting to look back, and as people migrated across America, think of what's that cult? Mormon.
Yep.
All those buildings and everything there, they couldn't build like that, but it was all these fancy buildings. In fact, when you look around the United States, there are these very Roman-looking buildings.
Australia too.
Yeah, and the thing is they just seem to pop up. There's no images of them or anything about it. They've phonied a few things, but it still doesn't show them actually building them.
Well, it's not even just it doesn't show them building them. If you sit there and you go, oh, gee, they were crossing the plains in their covered wagons and battling the Apaches, but they got some rockin' fucking 4-story buildings that are made of marble that got pillars like ancient Rome. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The guys who are doing the mud flood are looking at all the other different things, and it's been really interesting because they're showing so many different things. And it's like that map they found in the 1500s. California was a big island, and then all of a sudden it's connected. And that's a rather short period for that.
I have a comment.
Or it's a realm thing. Who knows?
This is where I'm saying I am not convinced that anything existed of our society 100 years ago. So I'm not convinced that anything of our society existed, and I'm sorry, Maury, don't get upset at me, 50 years ago. The more I look at shit, the more I sit here and go, did this whole video game just start running maybe 10,
I-
15
I've a
years
little-
ago?
I have a little
Maybe.
And it's all just a program piece of history. And prior to that, there was another simulation that ran that included all the shit from the mud floods and all the other shit that happened in different land masses, and things were moved around a little bit, reset it all up.
I have a little comment about the Mormon stuff. There definitely is some strange connections or fuckery with the temples, like in terms of the design. So the Salt Lake Temple, which was like their little gemstone, it was built with the intention of elevator shafts. When they were designing it, they according to Revelation, was supposed to put these large, big, holes for no reason, like, in the building, and
It just conveniently turned into elevator shafts once the elevator was invented.
And then
And
where did
also
all the
Salt Lake.
people go? Where did all the
Also-
people go?
Yeah. Also, downtown Salt Lake was designed so a full horse-drawn carriage could do a full 180 in the road, and they made all the roads super wide. Like back in the day, like that was unheard of to have roads that wide, and now that's downtown Salt Lake has no one-way streets really. It's all just like it was modern city planning.
So someone talked about resets and brought that up, resets. And I'm going to tell you about my own little experience I had this week. And Anne and Gail aren't here. I had a conversation with them today and we discussed it in depth. So they're not here to laugh at me retelling this again. I didn't leave the house. Like, it's like fucking Christmas. Like fucking hide. Just hide. So the last time I'd left the house was the morning of the 24th, going out to the little local shop to go get bread and milk to make sure you have enough coffee and milk to get you through, till the 26th. Did not leave the house on the 25th, the 26th, and on the 27th, Nick and I took the dogs for a walk. And those of you who've been here, so Mercedes, you'll remember where my house was, etc. And you go up the street to the right, which goes to where down below is the little crystal beach, and then up off to the side where what we call the aula is, where the dive rock is. This is where I walk the dogs all the time. This is an area where I've lived for 3 years, so I know every rock, every crack, etc. And we walked out and we looked over the edge to look down, look across the sea, because we always take a moment, look across the sea, how beautiful it is. And I look down towards the crystal beaches, maybe 3 stories down from where I'm standing, and I look, and there's a chunk, when the Azure window fell in Dwera 2 years ago, that same storm took down a chunk of the cliff face. And I looked at the chunk of the cliff face that's sitting in the water. And I looked at it and went, that doesn't look right. That doesn't look right. That's the wrong shape. That doesn't look right. I said something to Nick about, it's not right. So as we go off wandering, we get down to the cliffs area where the beach is. Beach, it's not a beach, it's just cliffs. And I'm looking out, and you let the dogs off the leash, they're running around like maniacs, and I'm looking. And I look at the dive rock, and I'm like, that's not right. It's not the right shape. The whole top of it is not the right shape. It's like someone has taken a butter knife and just flattened it completely. And there used to be chunks that stuck up towards the back. And then I pan to the right, and I look, and we have another piece of rock land that juts out into the sea, and it's very, very deep water all the way around it. So like basically there's ladders on both sides where you can climb in and out, but the only way getting into the water really is to jump in, and it's a good 15, 20 foot deep, the water at that point. And on the side, there's this like smooth rock that's like gently sloping into the water. And I turned to Nick and I went, what the fuck? And by this point, I'm literally standing there like this, turning in circles, looking around me, looking at everything. You know what I mean? Like really looking at shit and just going, that wasn't there. That's changed. That's changed. That is not the shape that should be. That was never there. I look around. I look to the opposite side of the bay, So you've got the bay water, and we've got like an edge of cliff that comes out, and then it kind of ducks in, and then you have another little piece that comes out, and there's an old watchtower, an old fire tower there. And now that old fire tower is sticking about an extra 100 meters out into the sea. Where I was standing, I should not have been able to have seen it. Yet I'm looking at it clearly, and I literally just sat there and you start sitting there going, where the fuck, like, everything's just fucking changed. In subtle changes. One area of road on the other side of the bay, which has always been cliff, is now got limestone bricks supporting the side of the road. It was never there before. The whole of everything, and on a subtle level, everything around me was changed. And I literally had this, I just sat there going, what happened? Like, I've had one, we see, like I said, when the trees appeared above my house back in June, right? And you go, okay, well, that's fucking weird. But literally everything had subtly changed around me. Everywhere I looked, at every angle, from the angles of the cliff faces was wrong. The slope of the stairs was wrong, everything. And I literally sat there and was like, okay, did we just get reset again? That was my first thought, was like, did we just get reset again? And they've just made some subtle changes, just things didn't quite line up when they dropped in, version 10.0, where there are just some slight changes in the graphics that they hadn't quite updated from the last time. They didn't quite get them dead the same. I don't know. But it was shocking. It was literally, like I said, you get so blasé over these changes when it's one or two, your keys go missing, something in the house changes. But when all of a sudden it's that dramatic, it was shocking to me. Literally shocked me right to the depths of the soles of my feet.
But it goes back to what you're saying about the ability to perceive it, and it's just amazing that we can. Really, because everybody else just files that shit away.
Yep.
Even like it'd have to be little things, and even then they're just like whatever,
Well,
but
it was like Nick didn't. The very first one, when I pointed out the rock and I said to Nick, that wasn't like that. That's the wrong shape. He was like, yeah, it's always been like that. Yeah, it's always been like that. And we got down to the front, and I was like, no, the dive rock is different. And he kind of looked at me was like, no. And then as I sat there and he realized how shocked I was, and I turned to the one thing where I said where it was sloping into the sea, and I'm like, we have dived off that rock. There's no way to climb out of the water except by the ladder. That was not there. It could not possibly have been there, because otherwise we would have swum there and just gently walked up the rock. You couldn't do it because it wasn't there. And then I could see it in him, and you could see him go, holy shit, no, she's right. No. And he was like, yeah, no, you're right. That's not possible. It couldn't be there. When I explained it to him with words of why I know it could not possibly have been there due to our own experiences standing on that rock, then it made sense. Then he perceived it. Until that point, he didn't perceive it.
I have a theory as to why that happened, and I want to applaud you for not letting your cognitive dissonance affect your reality. Because when you can't accept something, like it was just like, oh no, like I cannot accept this whole entire thing changed. You just don't see it, right? Yep. Or you're like, that was weird. What's for dinner? Or you just can't even perceive it. But like if you're open-minded, and you're open-minded so much to the fact that if the fucking world around you changes, and yes, you might be shocked, but you're not gonna like not allow that because it's like
no.
That would be.
But you're gonna hold it together, which is a beautiful thing.
It was that close though, Dawn. I'm not joking. It was that close to me not holding it together. It was that startling that I literally, like I said, I'm not joking when I said I stood there like this, eyes that wide, looking around me, 360 degrees, turning slowly, just going like.
Okay, I just had a freaky thought. What if I've experienced a drastic reality change? It was so jarring, I could not accept it, so therefore I didn't remember it.
But that's kind of how I felt about losing my mom. I told y'all when I shifted timelines, my mom was sick.
Yeah.
You know, I went through a horrible time in my own mind about that.
Well, I wonder. Okay, let's go there. When we hear stories now of people suddenly getting very, very sick, suddenly, out of the blue, whether it's like a massive heart attack or a stroke, etc., could that be a shift? Like, i.e., in one they're perfectly healthy, but in the other, maybe another timeline, another version 4.5, they've got physical problems, and then when all of a sudden it shifts and jumps to version 4.6, boom, it's there. I don't know.
You get a manifestation of it in some form or fashion. That's a great question.
Like I wonder how many ships on the horizon I'm not seeing because I would be so
That's
shocked.
the question I ask myself, Zero. That is exactly the question I ask myself. How many ships on the horizon have I not seen? And is it just a matter of that day I was in a really good mood and I'm just walking and I wasn't going out with a preconceived, it was just my eyes looked and my eyes went, that doesn't look right. And instead of just going, oh, I was like, okay, why doesn't it look right? And at that point, then you trigger that, and that's when everything else you went, and that doesn't look right, and that doesn't look right, and that's not right, and that's not right, and that's not right.
Yeah, that defines what happened to me. And I didn't even know, like, I had no filter but church. So I didn't know any of this shit. There's none. Yeah. You're going to what you know.
Yeah, I agree. Natalie just said if it's a simulation, it could be as easy as one code change, and that's why I made that analogy of version 3.0. They didn't quite get the graphics right. They shifted that landmass just 100 meters out off of where it should have been. Somebody put in, instead of XYZ equals 100, they put XYZ equals 200. I don't know.
And how does intention or expectation, for lack of a better word, where does that come into play, right? Because it seems on some levels our intentions can manifest, scenarios, but then there's other situations that it has nothing to do with.
Well, is it a matter of you deep down?
Oh, perspective.
Like conscious versus your unconscious, right?
Sure,
like,
sure.
For me, well, that's me. My place where I am right now is this has all got to change. Like this is all got to change, and I live that in the deepest part of my being.
Same here.
In this place of knowing this all has to fucking change. So does all of a sudden some click in the unconscious? When you get that at the unconscious level, like it filters through all the levels type thing, and at that point you suddenly are able to perceive the changes that are going on because you're intending that change.
And you're open
or it bleeds through to your conscious mind.
Or did we come into this place, reality, whatever you want to call it, with it was all set before, before we came in.
All right, Jane, I got one for you.
You go.
I got one for you on that one, Jane.
I'll be right back, guys. Hold on, I'll be right back.
We're sitting here saying consciousness, we have an intuition, a feeling, a knowledge, a thought, all that stuff. I'm reminded very strongly of a guy named Bruce Lipton who talks about consciousness. It does not really reside within the 3D form walking around anyway. It's non-local.
There you go.
But
I think
I just had a little connecting moment in terms of like the sorry, bear with me here. The like how many ships am I not seeing, So and combining that with a different concept. So let's say there are ships on the horizon and you're not seeing them, okay? So you could call that a blind spot. Well, literally with your eyes, we all have blind spots in our eyes. And what does your brain do with a blind spot? It doesn't.
Not there.
No, that's not true.
Oh.
It fills it in with something it thinks should be there.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, sure. Which is a blank spot.
Yes, and so when you combine those two concepts, it's like, here's this crazy outlandish thing, that process. That's a blind spot. What does our brain do with blind spots? It creates what it feels like it should be there, which could explain how we aren't witnessing these changes that are happening. And sorry, Dave, my last little comment was connecting to two different concepts. Like, so think about the ships on the horizon, right? And you can think of that as a blind spot, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, what does our brain do with our literal blind spots we see every day? Like, what our brain does, it doesn't show us that blind spot, that it's a blind spot. It just fills it in and makes it what we want to see.
Well,
I had someone say to me, I was talking to someone during an interview, and off camera, they'd said to me, I find all this stuff that you talk about so exciting, et cetera, but I never see it myself. I never ever see this kind of stuff. And it always, like, how come some people see it and how come it doesn't happen to other people?
Because
how do you politely say to someone, like, you're caught in a belief structure, and your belief structure is programming your mind that you're not going to see this shit until you drop those beliefs, those programming pieces, and to free your mind to start filling in that blind spot pieces.
And it could be intuitive. It could be intuitive seeing.
Sorry, Jane, say that again?
It could be intuitive seeing. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. Well, my little point is, how do you see actual blind spots? You can't look for them, because every time you try and look at them, you don't see it. The way you see a blind spot is you calm yourself and you notice it, right? I mean, and that's more of an intentional, like, being open-minded enough to notice things.
That's being in the now, Zero.
Yep. I agree.
Also known as mindfulness.
Which actually, Cynthia Sue Larson says that being in that state is what triggers reality shifts.
See, I've learned to live in that state, and I know it drives Maurice crazy, because that is just how there's very few things I plan out now, and he's all about that, so he'll get that look from me, like, really, like, I can't process that.
No, that's right.
I just given up on planning anything because it just never fucking works. So I just basically got to wake up in the morning and see what feels right for that day. And some days it means all of a sudden going, great, I'm going to be working on a website today because that just pinged up, and okay, guess we're rebuilding a website today. Okay. Because that's what happens to come out. And the next day you're like, I'll rebuild the website. No, I won't. I'm going to make a video. Or no, I'm going to go clean my kitchen. I need to have more of those days that make me go clean my kitchen. I really do. But they don't happen often.
And the rest of the world is running a very tight schedule,
Yeah, I like not being a part of that.
Exactly.
That's a big deal to me. Even though my life is stressful in a lot of ways, but
that's right. You can't be in the now if you're following the global. That's right.
And if you think about it, like, you'll never notice a blind spot if you're always just like this. Like, the way you notice a blind spot is, like, you kind of got to get still.
Well, they say our brain hallucinates reality, makes it up. And also, like, I forgot the quantum physics term, but, like, the shit to my left, does it exist if I'm not looking at it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It hasn't been rendered yet because I'm not looking in that direction.
Yeah. Like, oh, okay, it exists now.
Yep.
Or maybe, I don't,
Yeah, and Allison's right. Allison just said the maniac tight schedule is to keep us from seeing the glitches, and that's it.
Exactly.
Beyond the power structure, beyond the control of money and perceived control of humanity on that level, which is the level that most people talk about. Oh, they're making it so hard for us to live and to be able to make ends meet because they're sucking up all the money and they want to control. Okay, but beyond that, if you have an entire population of the world who's scrambling to put food on the table, who's trying desperately to make their rent payment, their mortgage payment, to meet a deadline, to get everything fit into what they can do, they're too tired, they're too exhausted, and they're too distracted by their own stress and fear and anger. Are they going to notice all the fucking glitches that are going on?
Of course
And that's
not.
why I talk about the distractions that they feed us continuously, the political distractions, the social story of the week of, you know, whether it was Harambe or whether it was, you know, some superstar has done this or whatever. They feed that to us because it's like a continuous distraction, so that people are going here. Oh,
so that we're good little chattel. Good little chattel.
Yeah. And then they could, you know, in the hopes that, I honestly believe, in the hopes that we will not notice just how bad this fucking reality is glitching now.
Of course.
And yeah, what you just said there, a lot of people aren't noticing, because I still notice the tunnel vision and everything. I'm really, like, you know me, I'm really observant. I look around. I'm like, I even look up at the ceilings in the grocery stores. In the stores, I look up a lot too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I told you the story of when my mom was sick. You know, I used to go over there all the time. And the one day, you know, we've been in this fucking house for what, 46 years. My grandpa built these houses, and I turned down the street, and instead of 2 magnolia trees, there's 2 palm trees.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I literally stop in the road, and I'm like,
what the fuck?
Yeah. But then I go to the house, and I tell my mom, she's in the bed, and she goes, no, honey, those have always been palm trees. So it's like, see, right there, I was like, what the fuck is this? What is this? I mean, how does she not know this?
Well, and this is the whole thing. So when I was talking to Cynthia, when we had her on the show last week, was it? Fuck. Feels like weeks ago. Once you recognize it, once you recognize these things and you become really aware of them in your now, you can start to look back at things that happened in your past and go, I had that happen. I remember when that happened, and I remember when it happened, I went, what the fuck is that? And then you go, okay, well, I'm obviously don't remember, or it's all, and then you block it out because you go, well, that can't be real. So obviously
the Harry Potter
you make an excuse. You make an excuse to yourself of like, well, I didn't notice it. I didn't remember it. I didn't do this, because it can't. Reality is reality. It's concrete. It's solid. And what is there is there. It doesn't enter. But when you look back, and I can look back now, all kinds of shit that happened to me in my past and go, now I know what was going on.
To bring some levity, the Harry Potter quote comes to mind where they're like, oh, the lengths muggles will go to explain away magic.
Yeah, exactly. exactly.
You know, I told my mom, I said, in my reality, Mama, those were magnolia trees. I used to play down at that house with Kim May. And she's just looking at me.
Yeah, because it's cognitive dissonance at that point. It's like the words that you're saying have no meaning because she can't fathom it not being the way she remembers. Right?
Yeah.
I have a thing that I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but you know, the pixelation on the fucking walls. Well, now when it's dark, like, you know, pitch black when you're going to fucking sleep, it's like a fucking shutter effect. Like, it's not completely dark. Nope. There's like some like white
Yeah.
You know,
I've seen it.
has anyone else
Green
experienced that?
and red
Yeah.
and blue and purple and yellow and
I don't understand it, and it creeps me out.
You can
Like,
actually
why?
see
What?
geometry in it. Like
Yep.
when I went to the beach house, I shit you
Yes.
not, I laid down in the bed at the beach house and I in the dark and I could see a grid pattern over
Yep.
me.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
And I wonder, because one of the things that I see a lot now is I see green. And I usually see it in almost like morphing, I don't want to say exploding patterns. That's not quite right.
Is
But
it
it
an
comes
emerald?
almost like splashes. Like if you're lying there with your eyes closed and you'll see it here, and you'll see green, and then you'll see it and it'll go, and then, and I've done all the tasks that you do to make sure it's not your eyes, like your eyes are not moving, and like to the point of you're focusing on your inside your eyelid straight ahead, so you know that you're seeing it out of your peripheral. It's not your eyes moving causing these color patches to move. And then some days they're not there. And then some days they're incredibly vivid. And I'm like, okay, am I seeing cosmic ray frequencies? Right? Like, are you sensing magnetic frequencies? Is that, and your brain is translating it into color?
I think that we know a lot more than we give ourselves credit for because we can't acknowledge or understand it. But I think a lot of the knowing is there. Have you ever experienced something that you went through an event or a situation, and then when it was over, you thought to yourself, "Well, fuck, I knew that was going to happen."
All the
know
time?
what I mean?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And somehow our soul, our spirit, or whatever, our inner being, we knew it was going to happen, and we can't explain why or how we know, but the knowing is there. And yeah.
Do you know what I hate more though? Is when you go to do something, say you're in the kitchen, and you go to pick up a bowl or a jar. You know,
Right.
Don't pick that up right now. Your hands are wet,
Right.
and that's going to slip and fall.
Well, that's not.
And
listening
just
to that.
exactly as you're thinking the words, you pick it up, you start to move, and it does exactly what you knew it was going to do. And you're like, you got to listen to yourself more. Listen, when you have those thoughts, listen to yourself and put the fucking jar down before you drop it on the floor and smash
But
jam everywhere.
there's an expanded version of that when major shit happens in your life.
Yeah.
And you know that you just have that thing inside of you that, fuck, I knew that was coming. You know? Right.
I don't know, Jane, if you play this game, when you have those
I don't
kind of
play
thoughts
games,
come into your
honey.
head,
Yeah.
it's something negative.
Oh, yeah.
I follow it up immediately with an I do not consent.
Exactly. Yep.
Like it is
yes,
like as
I've
soon as you start to think something negative is going to happen, it's like I don't consent. I do not consent.
You know what though?
Like
You
it's
know
not.
what though?
It's not you. It's not you.
Right, but there's things that happen like, okay, all right, I'm just gonna say it, and I don't intend to take this deep or anything like that. But like before my son passed away, he was healthy and thriving, but he was going through shit for many, many years, and I knew in my soul that I was probably gonna lose him, right? But yet while he was with me, I kept believing in him and kept believing that and being positive and casting out those thoughts, yada yada. But
I
when
know what
shit,
you mean.
but when shit, comes to the table and it's in your face, you know what I mean? That knowing that you knew, it's there. It just is. And that can happen on different levels. It doesn't have to be losing a loved one or whatever.
No.
Right.
No, I know exactly what you mean. Yep.
I was going to say real quick, buddy, jump here. When you mentioned about, like picking up something even though you shouldn't because, you might drop it. I've learned to go by my first,
Right.
I'm like, I'm not doing that over and over. The learning curve thing, the learning curve of that, I'm like,
We need to listen to ourselves more often.
Listen to those gut feelings. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And isn't that where intuition comes in?
Yeah.
You know, or that still
But
quiet
again,
voice.
then you sit there and you go like, time doesn't exist. And consciousness doesn't need linear time. So we perceive something in the future, but is it that we perceive something, we have an intuition about it in the future? Or is it just the fact that we already know, because we've already been there, we've already done that, we already know what's coming, and you just have those
Walk that
moments of
maze.
clarity where that comes through.
That's another word I've been thinking about lately, intuition. I thought about that whole tuition thing and intuition, how tuition, the fees to get into something like tuition. I've thought about that stuff. I'm like, I gotta find another word besides intuition.
I agree with you. It's not a word I like.
I don't even like it. It's part of the old paradigm anyway. I'm trying to change everything.
Good call, Star. Good call.
It's the only thing the English language, the modern English language gave us.
We're knowing.
Knowing, exactly.
You know.
Yep,
Exactly.
I said that. Yep. And that's the kind of thing you can't put words to.
No. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, where language we've been crippled by language, so we can't define these things.
Yeah.
You can't have the conversation because we're using words that have other meanings.
Right. How did people communicate before? When you think about that, they must have been communicating psychically, you know.
Well, no, but even other languages.
Emotions, movements.
Okay, but other languages are better languages. And I always go back to, for example, ancient Greek. They have 5 different words for love. And each one is very specific of what it means. And you can't mix them up and be like, oh, I love my coffee, and say love as in the love that you would use about your child or the love that you have for your husband, because they're entirely different words. It doesn't cross. So it's like, for example, German. German is a language that has got words that we have no fucking concept. Like, they have words that describe emotional states that we just don't even have words for. I used to have that joke with Gabriel, with my son, because of course he's fluent in German because he speaks in Germany, and he would come up with terms and I'd be like, what? And he goes, well, that is, and there's a word, of course I can't remember the word now. And he used to say it all the time about, you know, like, for example, if one of the kids fell down and bumped their head or fell off the couch or something, and then one of the other kids they've just been having a tug of war over a book with would start laughing, and he'd use this word, and I'm like, what does that mean? He goes, he says in English it would be kind of like, the word means the feeling of joy that you get from someone else's misfortune.
Oh, it makes you think of like a sadist.
No, not a sadist. That's not it at all.
Like a pie in the
Again,
face.
English word has this word in German has absolutely no English.
But then there's the moral code.
Yes, that's it. So, Mercedes, say the word for me, please, because I can't say it.
Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude. There you go. And it means taking delight in someone else's misfortune.
And isn't that like missing a moral code?
No, it's just the description. I mean, everybody does it. Your best friend fucking falls down because they step on a fucking banana peel, and you fucking laugh.
Funny. Yeah, I've done that. Yep,
Taking delight in someone else's misfortune.
I've read that as sadism.
But that's not sadism. Sorry, go ahead, Mercedes. Hold on. Let Mercedes weigh in. We're talking about German.
For me, it only counts for minor things where the other person doesn't get hurt.
No, it's minor things. It's not a sadistic thing. No, not at all.
Yeah, thank you. Because I used that word kind of as a convenient thing. It's not the same thing as sadist, but this.
No, it's not like that at all.
Yeah, like Bill Hicks would say. You go up to people who go up to smokers and coughing at smokers. Like what are you, a sadist? You go up to crippled people too, wheelchairs, and dance around.
No, it's not like that at all, right? It's a very.
I know what you mean.
G-rated.
It's very light. It's a very. Light. It's just a. It's not a terrible thing. It's not like. It's just a description of something that we all do, but there's no word in the English language for that. And German has a lot of those kind of words, like words. Gabriel went through a whole pile of them, and he was like, like things even to do with how you love something, but like something, but. And he was giving me these words, and he says, "But we don't have like." For example, him and his girlfriend would be having a conversation. Her English wasn't very good, or actually was pretty fucking good. But you stumble on a word, and she'd turn to him and say to him in German, and he'd be like, "Okay, how would I translate that? Because there's no English word for that."
Here are a few examples in the chat.
It's levels. But you know what I wanted to say, Danny, is I heard a show the other day. I thought this was interesting, that when the white people came over here and were taking over everything, there was a specific Indian tribe here called the Nez Perce.
Yeah.
And that they did not have a word for lying.
Exactly.
They did not have a word for being anything other than honest. So they didn't even understand the concept. So they ended up helping the white man very much without really realizing it. I just.
When we lived in the Congo, Don, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to be specific, has got 5 official languages or 6 official languages, but there's like 100 languages that are spoken in the country because they're tribal languages, right? And I can't remember if it's Lingala.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Lingala, which is one of the more commonly spoken languages. Same thing. They had no word for lie. They had no word for steal, for thief. And the words that came in, the words, when I'm pretty sure it was Lingala, or it may have been Swahili. I can't remember. I think it was Lingala, though. That the word that they use now in that language was actually borrowed from one of the other tribal languages, because their language literally did not have a word for lie, steal,
any of that,
murder.
So those energies were not present in that tribe. And let's take it a step further. That head of that tribe had this relic that he gave the white man, and it was a relic that had been passed
I saw that video.
Yeah, since the Atlantis days, I believe, and it said a white man gave it to us. You know, so like he didn't have any. He didn't, But I just thought it was shocking.
Yep.
I blame it all on the Tower of Babel.
I was gonna mention that earlier with the whole language shit.
Well, you know, there's different ways to take the story of the Tower of Babel. Remember that the Bible is an allegory. It's not an actual. It's not a historical document. It's all allegory, right?
All allegory.
Same story written over and over and over for different cultures at different times.
Well,
using
just
the same
a story that
avatars.
is created. An allegory is a story that is created to teach a point, to teach a moral, and the moral to this story is blah.
It's supposed to be self-reflective in like mysticism type way, but when it's exoteric and not esoteric, it's completely changed. Completely. So.
What did we do before language even came into existence? Were we cavemen and women? Or did we?
No.
Or were we actually able to use our
my
abilities?
My personal belief, if you want to call it that, knowing we were genetically created just exactly as we are. The different races were genetically created, and we were given language because that's what we were given.
Thank you for saying that.
But was there not a higher?
Sure. Read the story of the Pneumo. Read Genesis Antarctica. There's a billion stories out there. Even the Bible, as an allegory, gives you a story about another race that came in and created Adam and Eve, the first 2 genetic parents of our species. Yeah, but it's an allegory. It's an
We've been-
allegory, right? Like don't take it as a story of historical fact. Take it as Adam was the male and Eve were the females, and they were created one from the other, and then they were, left to propagate in their area of the world.
Genetic stuff, genetic insert. Makes me think of the fifth element. Makes me think of the fifth element type of thing, where they just.
What about the giants? Damn it!
But what? They're just another species.
Right.
Like that. I mean, this is the guy who's the Italian guy, who's the translator, whose name is gone right out of my head again. Fuck! I've got the memory of a sieve tonight. Baglioni, who was called in by the Vatican to translate some of the ancient fucking documents, and he retranslated Genesis and was like, this has nothing to do with God. Aliens came down and fucking created us, genetically made us, and this is the story of genetic manipulation by an alien race. That's what this is. And of course he got kicked out of the Vatican.
Yeah, that's a great interview. If we could find that, that's great.
I've posted it multiple times. It's posted on the old Removing the Shackles blog. I've got one of his original videos, I'm pretty sure, posted in there. This is the whole thing, right? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, we have all these stories that talk about this. And I'm going deep down a rabbit hole right now. I'm deep down a rabbit hole in the hopes that I will have an opportunity to speak to a certain person who will be able to verify certain information sometime in the near future. That's all I'm going to say about as far as who. When I'm looking, hold on, Zero. When I'm looking at this information and I'm looking at the alien stories, and I'm re-looking at Bill Wood stuff. I'm trying desperately to reach out to find someone who's got contact information for Bill Wood. Dan Burish, all these guys who've come forward and brought us information. But then when you take it in conjunction with the story of the pneumo, the story that is told in Genesis Antarctica, which, like I said, through someone I know for a fact that those urns were found in Antarctica and they were studied in Australia. He was there. Okay, so he knows for a fact that this did happen. This is not just some fictional story. It was written like fiction, but it was done that way because it was the only way they would be allowed to put the story out. All of it speaks of genetically creating humans. And I'm looking at one of my big questions, and I've been going back and forth on this question for a long time now, is who claims ownership of human beings?
Exactly. And
Okay.
saying we're going home. What is home?
Yeah, don't fucking fall for that shit. Okay? We have all these stories of Anunnaki, reptilians, Orions, P-45s, P-52s, fucking galactic federations. We have all these different, the pneumo, we have all these different, and then that even excludes the stuff coming out of China, because this information is also coming out of China as well. Ancient stories.
Hey, Danny.
Someone, hold on, Maury. I just want to try and get this out.
Yeah, I know.
If someone, race, genetically created humans, if this planet is in fact quarantined, that no one's supposed to be allowed to come here.
Slave system.
I don't think so. It is being used that way. It's being used that way for sure, but that's not the reason why it was created.
Cool.
The one common denominator that comes down to a lot of these stories is the fact of humans were created and were given something genetically that no one else has. And that's why we're quarantined, and that's why. But now you got a question. When we hear stories, so I'm reviewing all the Dan Bursch videos. I have been all Christmas. When you hear about treaties that were signed between the Orions and Earth to control, therefore, does that give the Orions the control? But we know that the Orions are not the original. the Orions, by their own story, are humans 52,000 years in the future. They're not our creators. So what happens if those that originally created humans come back? And I have a big question right now of, is that the war that we're seeing play out at this moment? In information, the information that's being put forward is always slanted. There's this side, there's this. Politically on the planet, there's this. It's all slanted to factions. And is that part of it? Is this war of factions as to who controls the planet? And I don't think it's like these fucking earthly, I don't give a rat's ass about Trump or Putin or fucking Kim Jong-il or any of these fucking Elizabeth. Who cares?
You nailed it.
They might have money and weapons, but they don't have shit.
No, these guys are they're like lower end management. It's very obvious that they're very low level management.
Janitors.
Yeah, and look at this, everything coming out about Space Forces. Hello?
There's too many things going on right now that are very, very open that people need to start questioning again. And a lot of it comes from stuff that we were told prior to 2012. And that's why I'm going back and reviewing a lot of the stuff that was said in 2003, 2007, 2009, because we've conveniently forgotten this stuff. But now, look at it again, as these guys were doing these interviews in, say, 2007 and 2005 and talking about what's going to happen after 2012. Well, we're in the after 2012. We've seen how this shit has played out. So I have a lot of questions right now as to who exactly is pulling these strings. And it's very easy to take one side of the story and say, well, this guy is right, therefore everyone else is wrong.
Dangerous.
And it's not that easy, because this guy might be right because he's been told everything that he was supposed to have been told to support that narrative. But this guy could also be right because he's been told what he was told to support that narrative. There's a lot of shit going on right now, and I feel like we're that close. Like we're this close to it. We just need to finish sorting the puzzle pieces.
Another aspect of that
with all that?
Another aspect of that control structure could also another aspect of that control structure, going back to the language part of it, is that, love, like English, like one word for love. And if you think about how many terms there are for killing, just to name a few, like,
yeah.
I mean,
you don't have to name them, but yeah.
And I also
think, go ahead, hold on. Jane, what was it you wanted to add?
No, I was just going to say, what do we do with that accumulated knowledge,
we figure out the puzzle.
Well, yes, exactly. And so the accumulated knowledge, does that affect perspective? Okay, you see where I'm going? And right. And what the fuck do you do with that? When you've got the majority of the planet, their perspective is not even acknowledged. They go according to their programming, you know what I mean? Right? And then again, you think, well, maybe we are the ones we've been waiting for, and the minority will be the ones anyway. Anyway, I'll just.
Well, I got into. Oh, hold on, Maura, you go ahead. Maura, you had something you wanted to say. We talk about language, and we talk about, and I always bitch about. I hate how expressions get used and warped. So like that new ageisms. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and people, you find yourself saying these expressions, and they tie us up in knots. And one of the ones is like what was just said, is like, we have to be the ones to save ourselves. We have to be the ones to save ourselves. And I just had this conversation with Ann earlier today, and Gail. That's like a fucking bullshit, right? Because if we're talking about a quarantine around the planet, and we're talking about what could very well be and looks like some kind of a universal battle of control going on. We're just the fish in the fishbowl at this point. But as we expand our perception and we start to be able to see this shit going on, does that not allow us then to change it? Change it as in we have, by acknowledging it, by being able to perceive it, all of a sudden it becomes easier to make, I don't want to say choices isn't the right word, but able to say, I do not consent. I'm fuck this shit on a level of consciousness that actually does have an impact. Do you know what I'm saying? That has an impact and actually matters in the end run. So I think it's a subtle thing that people say, like, oh, well, we have to be the ones who save ourselves. Well, yeah, no, but we do make the change through our perceptions and how much we know and realize that we can then say, you know, exactly what Allison just said, free will, right? At that free will point, be like, I'm not fucking playing this game anymore. I was joking with Ann today saying, I want to put out like a video and say, do you know how, and John's talked about this and a few others, putting up a notice on your door to like salesmen being like, if you call me or you knock on my doorbell, I charge $100 per minute, payable immediately in silver bullion, blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm kind of at the point of wanting to put a video saying, all those fuckers out there who are delaying us, who are negotiating, which is one of the things that we keep seeing, people who are in tune to this keep seeing these negotiations happening. All of you guys fuckers are out there who are negotiating and trying to, you know, who's going to get the best deal, etc. I don't consent. Not only do I consent, I withdraw all my energy, and from now on, every day that you delay this fucking bullshit, I'm going to charge you 100 troy ounces of pure silver at 18% interest accrued daily, and that's what it's going to, if you're going to keep playing this game, I'm going to speak to it in your terms. You want my energy? You're the one fucking around with my life, which is my energy. Now I'm going to charge you for it. Now I'm going to charge you for it. Every fucking day that you just keep doing this fucking bullshit, delays, and whatever it is that we all keep seeing, I'm going to charge you for it now.
Yeah,
I would call it
Hit you where it hurts.
I would even call it energetically turning the tables on. It's like, yeah, turning their own energy against them anyways is what.
What is it, love? I can't.
That's
Oh, there you
that-
go. Pull it
remember I
back.
told you
Pull
I
it
got
back.
that big ass coin.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's quite the coin. Holy crap.
And then look at the back. Can you see it?
Yeah, but what is it? Is it one
myself.
troy pound of silver? Nice. There you go.
It's huge.
Very nice.
I've never seen anything so big in my life.
Yeah, holy crap.
So that's what you're going to charge them every day. One of these.
Yep, charge them one of those every fucking day that they keep these delays going. We don't consent to this shit anymore. Shit or get off the pot.
This is
Done
from the
with
year
all your
2000.
fucking bullshit.
It says year 2000.
Yeah.
So at the bottom. It's a very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
What I said.
Okay. Well, my darlings, it's after 1 o'clock in the morning here. I have to go to bed. It's
I'm
my
musing
bedtime.
about something too that Maury just said. I'm musing about what Maury just said about the after show, and I was thinking, no, it's all been one big show. Just one big.
Just one big
Yeah.
chat.
My
Free
brain
for
was-
all. One big free for all. There we go.
Danny, can I ask everybody for a favor? You know my granddaughter who just had the baby? Well,
Yep.
she had the puppies too. Remember the twins of evil?
Yes.
And one of them, about 3 days ago, swallowed a sock. And he finally passed it, an adult sock. but he's not doing too well. And everybody just send some good woo woo to Thanos, the bulldog
Puppy?
please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely,
He
definitely.
needs some. He hasn't eaten for 3 days. They may take him to the vet tonight, the hospital to stay them. Pardon me, Dawn?
What's happening is his organs are shutting down. They have to.
Yeah.
They're gonna have to put him on an IV.
I was just going to say he may need IV fluids to restart him again.
My granddaughter sensed something with the pancreas and that, so she's wondering if it's 2 separate issues.
On the 3rd day, that's it.
Yeah.
They haven't eaten. That's when it starts.
Okay.
Okay.
But well, he's supposed to go tonight, and that she's talking to the vet and that about taking him back in. But good woo woo, please.
We will definitely send a good woo woo.
Thank you.
Okay, my darlings. So there's no show on Wednesday because it's New Year's. On Sunday we'll have to do a movie, so I'll have to we'll have to put up the movie poll, put a movie poll up again, and figure out what movie we want to watch next Sunday. Not this Sunday because that's today, but next Sunday.
Yeah, I was just musing to myself about the year, the calendar changeover, and I was just thinking just hours ago, just within the past 24 hours, about this whole 0000 thing. I'm like, maybe fuck 2020. Maybe I just ought to go straight back to 0000. I'm like, I'm done. So
Y2K, a la Y2K. Yeah.
I like that. Well, you said thank you for saying that. It's just, yeah.
No, I think it'd be worth taking a second look at Y2K with fresh eyes. See what they actually tried to pull off, because they did something.
Good point there, Dawn. I remember that whole Y2K.
They did something.
And yeah, I remember that. They even talked about those Art Bell. They talked about that whole Y2K thing.
I'm just saying, as much as we know now, I think it would be pretty easy to, if we look back, we're like,
I'm reading Danny's face right now. She's not using English language, and Danny knows something. You can see it coming through.
I worked with computer programs, just computer programmers, and not your average computer programmers. One used to work for NASA. The other one used to work for Microsoft when Microsoft first started. They were major programmers for both. And they had a whole conversation. There was an ongoing joke in 97 and 98 about what they could do to the computer systems to generate billions of dollars for themselves over Y2K. And they used to openly talk about how wide open the system was and how they could, and these are the guys, the kind of people who program shit. So they could do shit in programming that was above and beyond anything I've ever witnessed since. Like these guys were, and they used to joke about it, being like, "Oh, we could do this, we could do that, we could just drop in this worm, and the worm would go in." One of the things they talked about is, and they literally created the program, and then deleted it. But they were, and that was a joke one night during a lot of drugs, and while playing a LAN match of Doom, because it was 97.
That was a good game.
They wrote a program that would go into every bank account in the world and steal all the quarter pennies, all the half pennies, because your bank account will say $1,156.25, but the reality of it's 25 cents 0.968 or 0.342, and they wrote a program to go into every single bank account, every single central bank, and steal every half penny out of every account in the world.
That's fucking awesome.
I've never heard of that term before. Half penny.
They wrote the program. They literally they wrote the program, and they were like, no one would know. No one would know, because a half a penny from your account. Is anyone going to notice a half of a cent missing from your account?
Fuck no.
About that, where they did that in a movie.
Well, then they stole it from my buddies, the idea from my buddies, and since they're still poor, I know they didn't go through with it. They did say at the end of the night, we're like, okay, we better delete this because.
Oh yeah, Jeff said the movie's Office Space. It's called Office Space, and that's exactly what they do. This company it's like a worldwide company of so many customers, and they designed a program to steal the whatever, like that decimal whatever, and they made a lot of money.
See, the guys like they sat there like working it out, the math, and they figured they could make something ridiculous, like if they did every bank account and all the central banks and everyone else, they figured that they could make at least $1 billion, like at least $1 billion from doing it.
Nobody ever noticed.
But they used to talk about. They used to sit there all the time, talk about Y2K, and they'd be like, well, they worked for a government. They built the intranet for an entire government, and they said, we're firewalling it, and we've set it up according to Y2K because we know what could happen, and they got paid to come in and do the job that way. But they said, like all these stuff, he's just hacking into these places, no problem. These guys were like child's play, and could set all kinds of stuff. And they used to joke about the kind of practical jokes that they dreamed up that they could plant into the fucking computer systems of the world, just as a joke. So,
I believe it.
Yep.
Definitely remember that, all that hype on the radio, even though late night, coast to coast, the hype around it, like talking to the chip, the people, the ones in charge of the chips, the computer chips, all that shit that run the electricity, yada, yada. And I remember all the hype about that. Yeah.
Yep.
Wasn't John Cheeter also coming around at that time?
What?
Was that when Titer was around? I don't remember. That was like way before I was into any of this kind of stuff. Like I wasn't looking at any of this kind of stuff back then at all. So I don't know.
But I think I heard after it that it was around the time, but I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I don't
also, but The Matrix was filmed around that time.
1999.
You know what? I'm telling you, when you stay up, like when I did smoking crack, I'd be up 3 days, and I saw a lot. And I look back now, like I said, when we go to sleep, they update us and shit, and I wasn't being updated.
Dark City, Sin City, Dark City.
Mm-hmm.
Which one movie is it? We had this conversation last week. Is Dark City?
Dark City.
Dark City.
Yeah.
We should almost watch that one. Except it's really dark. It's not a nice movie.
I haven't seen that one in a few years.
It really gives you a good, if we go into it with the right insight of trying to understand this concept, then that'll protect us from the dark stuff. Because in essence, that's what we're, I believe that's what they're doing when we sleep.
Yeah.
It's just like, Dawn, it's like in that scene I posted from Dark City, they had like the baldish heads, like the observers.
Funny, like the observers, all those bald-headed guys who control shit. Isn't that funny how that always comes around?
Telling you, and the average, it makes me wonder, because like I always think in the back of my head, how many other people notice this, that are on drugs, and of course, the psychiatric system's all pegged into this to put you on something immediately, so you'll never put it together. So
right, for sure.
You'll never put it together, but it is. There are cracks, and they've got them well protected, those cracks, don't they?
Yeah. Okay, loves, I have to go to bed. It's now 1:15. I love you all.
Thank you, Danny.
Have a good New Year's. Try not to get into trouble, and everyone just fucking chill. This week is like, it's the chill out week. There's not fuck all you can do anyway, so you might as well just
don't go out anymore.
I'm blowing some shit up. I go and buy some fireworks. I can do them right at the end of my driveway. I'm gonna be blowing some shit up.
You're too funny, Dawn.
Amazing.
Okay, guys, I love you.
Bye.
Good night.
Hey, Danny. Bye, everybody.